the imperial palace of the Great Sun Divine Kingdom. Jian Wushuang stepped on the void and his black hair flew in the air. Under him, the majestic Great Sun Divine Kingdom was like an ant. At that moment, thousands of people in Great Sun Divine Kingdom looked up at Jian Wushuang, and they couldn't help but feel terrified. They had never thought that Jian Wushuang would barge into the Great Sun Imperial Palace in such an arrogant and overbearing way without any fear. "This is Jian Wushuang? You're indeed a heaven's favorite. I heard that Jian Wushuang has only cultivated for 700,000 years, but he has already stepped into the Great Sun Divine Kingdom. He is really admirable. This is how a man should be." In Great Sun Divine Kingdom, countless people looked up at Jian Wushuang's figure and spoke. "How audacious!" At this moment, a handsome young man in luxurious clothes rushed out of the palace. "Jian Wushuang, this is a forbidden area of the imperial palace. How dare you be so presumptuous?" The young man in luxurious clothes looked at Jian Wushuang coldly and scolded him. "What?" Jian Wushuang raised his eyebrows and asked, "Who are you? Where is the King of Day?" "I am the 7th Prince of the Great Sun Divine Kingdom. Haoji." "Jian Wushuang, you want to see my father?" Great Sun Prince flicked his sleeve and snorted. "Great Sun Prince is here. Great Sun Prince has recently broken through to Beginner Supreme. It's highly possible that he will inherit the throne of Emperor God in the future. In terms of aura, Great Sun Prince isn't any weaker than Jian Wushuang." The city was abuzz with discussion. Great Sun Prince's face was expressionless, but his eyes flashed with pride. Why did he volunteer to be the first one to come out? Wasn't it because he wanted this effect? "Jian Wushuang, leave now. I'll let it go today. If you dare to act so arrogantly here again, don't blame me for being impolite to you." Great Sun Prince snorted. This heavy snort was like a thunderbolt. It was like a bolt from the blue. He had already used his supreme divine power, and it shook the entire Great Sun Divine Kingdom. "You won't be polite?" Hearing this, Jian Wushuang could not help but smile. "Even your father, the King of Day, wouldn't dare to say this to me. Where did you get the guts to threaten me?" "Impudent!" Great Sun Prince was instantly enraged. "Jian Wushuang, you dare to insult my father? I see that you're only relying on the Tarot Divine Sword to achieve your ambitions. Do you dare to fight me without the Tarot Divine Sword? Are you even worthy?" Jian Wushuang laughed contemptuously and shook his head. "Go back and ask your father to come see me." Bang! As soon as he finished speaking, Jian Wushuang pointed his finger at the prince. In the void, there was a sudden trembling sound. A sword chi gathered at Jian Wushuang's fingertips and shot out. It turned into a palm that looked like rolling black waves. It crossed the sky and landed on Great Sun Prince's face. Bang! A red handprint instantly appeared on Great Sun Prince's face. He was dizzy from the slap and saw stars. In the next moment, a huge force exploded on his face, and he fell like a meteor into the imperial palace, smashing countless halls. He was in an extremely sorry state. In the Great Sun Divine Kingdom, all the people were petrified when they saw this scene. Great Sun Prince was so arrogant just now. But it's all gone with one slap? What just happened? This is just a fucking suicide mission. Everyone swallowed their saliva and said in shock. Jian Wushuang's expression was indifferent, neither sad nor happy. To him, cultivators below the Supreme Being level were not even the slightest bit of interest. At this moment, a furious roar suddenly sounded. Jian Wushuang! Boom! A dignified middle-aged man wearing a crown and a dragon robe flew up from the palace. He stared at Jian Wushuang and was extremely furious. This man was none other than the King of Day. "Jian Wushuang, you killed my son, the young emperor, and now you destroyed my palace and seriously injured my son. You've gone too far," the King of Day shouted. An extremely terrifying aura, like an angry ocean, constantly set off violent waves, beating in all directions. This energy came from the same source as Great Sun Prince, but it was much stronger. They were not on the same level. "Now this is interesting." Jian Wushuang nodded his head in admiration. The Emperor God of the Great Sun's divine power was so strong that it was much stronger than Blood Sky rulers. Then, Jian Wushuang looked at the King of Day as if he had heard the funniest joke in the world. He sneered and said, "Bullying? Back then, the 6 of you chased me all the way from the ancient path of stars to the Divine Life Palace. In the end, you even wanted to flatten the Divine Life Palace to kill me." Supreme White Tiger had fallen. Supreme Gai Fu had fallen into a deep sleep, and countless disciples of the Divine Palace had died. Do you remember this debt? Have you ever thought of going too far? Now you say that I, Jian Wushuang, am a bully. What a joke! Toward the end, Jian Wushuang's words became heavier and heavier, like a thunderclap, deafening even the deaf. He had come to annihilate the 6 forces not only for him, but also for the dead souls of the disciples of the Divine Life Palace who had been killed to protect him and him. As long as he didn't destroy these 6 forces, he wouldn't be at ease. You! The King of Day's face changed and he couldn't say anything to refute Jian Wushuang. He gritted his teeth. Jian Wushuang, enough nonsense. This king might as well tell you that you won't be able to walk out of this great Sun Divine Kingdom today. After taking a deep breath, the King of Day's eyes shone. Is that so? Jian Wushuang sneered and slowly held the hilt of the Tarot Divine Sword in his hand. He said, "Emperor God, prepare to receive the gift that I, Jian Wushuang, am giving you." A gift for me? What gift? The King of Day's eyes narrowed, and divine power surged from his body, transforming into a blazing sun behind him. "I'm sending you to your death." Boom! In an instant, the Tarot Divine Sword was unsheathed. A huge and terrifying sword pressure instantly descended on the whole area, and sword chi filled the air. Under this sword pressure, it was as if the King of Swords had come to the world. All the cultivators who used swords in the entire Great Sun Divine Kingdom instantly threw their divine swords out of their hands and shot into the sky, bowing to the Tarot Divine Sword. In just a few breaths, the entire city was filled with 3-foot swords. What? How did this happen? My sword! For a moment, the whole place fell into a dead silence. Then it burst into an uproar. Everyone's eyes were wide open as they looked at the scene of the 10,000 swords. In the void, the divine swords that filled the sky were all like subjects, floating under the Tarot Divine Sword. The Tarot Divine Sword was one of the 7 extreme ancestral weapons that were born when the universe was created. It specialized in killing and could be said to be the ancestor of swords. Jian Wushuang, who was holding the Tarot Divine Sword, looked like a peerless sword god. His eyes were cold and untainted by the mortal world. Kill! At the next moment, Jian Wushuang stomped his right foot and flew up. He held his sword and charged at the King of Day. With one step, 10,000 swords moved. Under Jian Wushuang's feet, the thousands of divine swords turned their tips and gathered like a long dragon. They were stepped on by Jian Wushuang and they crashed toward the King of Day. This sword cut across the sky and split the sea of clouds. Jian Wushuang, who was protected by thousands of swords, raised his right hand and slashed down at the King of Day. He raised his hand and used the heaven-opening sword move. Good timing. The King of Day was not afraid at all. Instead, he laughed in anger and a red light surged from his hand. He was like an eternal divine king who held the sun, moon, and stars in his hand as he charged at Jian Wushuang. Jian Wushuang, I was planning to write off all the old scores since you've broken through to the supreme level. Who knew that you'd be so insensible and dare to come to my door? Then don't blame me for making you stay here today. You're noisy. Jian Wushuang's eyes were cold. The sky-opening sword light that he had casually slashed down collided with the boundless red light. An extremely profound sword principle true meaning exploded and directly disintegrated the boundless red light inch by inch. Jian Wushuang's understanding of the sword principle had reached a terrifying level after he had obtained the sword principle inheritance from Tarot ruler. It would not be an exaggeration to say that it had reached the peak. Jian Wushuang, your talent is indeed outstanding. Whether it's your comprehension of the divine power or your use of the great Tao, you're above me. It's a pity that you've forgotten one thing. No matter how strong you are, you're still a beginner supreme being. The total amount of divine power between you and me is not on the same level. Even if you are a perfect chaotic life form, you can't cross this gap. Close. The King of Day snorted and two small suns gushed out from his palms. As they came together, a huge amount of divine power burst out and crushed Jian Wushuang's heaven-opening sword light. The thousands of divine swords under Jian Wushuang's feet, which had gathered into a long dragon, scattered and flew back in all directions. It's indeed not bad. Jian Wushuang squinted his eyes and showed an interested expression. The Emperor God of the Day and the Blood Sky Hall Master were about the same in terms of power, but their fighting methods were completely different. The Blood Sky Palace Master was like a venomous snake lurking in a dark corner, ready to pounce at any time to deliver a fatal blow. The King of Day, on the other hand, was unstoppable and overwhelming. Come! Jian Wushuang stretched his neck and his eyes were filled with fighting spirit. He grabbed at the King of Day again. Clang! Jian Wushuang's sword was caught by the King of Day's hands. His right leg was like a whip, sweeping across and hitting the King of Day's waist. Dong! With a muffled sound, the King of Day felt a strong vibration from his waist, which bounced off Jian Wushuang's right leg. He laughed. Jian Wushuang, don't think that I don't know that you've awakened the undying overlord body. It's a pity that my divine sun body is also one of the primordial divine bodies. Although it's not as good as your undying overlord body, this king's realm is much higher than yours. Is that so? Jian Wushuang's eyes flashed with surprise. One should know that his foot could collapse 1,000 mountains with 1,000,000,000,000 tons of force. Ordinary supreme beings would be injured upon contact, let alone withstand it. However, Jian Wushuang quickly regained his calm. He swung his right hand and the Tarot Divine Sword cut off the King of Day's hands. Then he stabbed forward again. Humph! He snorted. The King of Day snorted and took a few steps back to avoid the attack. However, before he could reassemble his hands and launch a move, Jian Wushuang's indifferent figure flashed and appeared behind him like a ghost, leaving a long trail of afterimages. Then he attacked again. Rip! The next moment, the Tarot Divine Sword tore a long hole in the Divine Sun body, and divine blood spurted out. How could he be so fast? The King of Day's pupils shrunk. In a moment of shock and anger, he reorganized his hands, held the two small suns, and raised his fists to kill Jian Wushuang. Boom! 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 There were explosions one after another. Jian Wushuang's expression was cold. As he moved, he swung the Tarot Divine Sword in his hand, tearing open wounds on the body of the King of Day. A sword technique didn't need to be so powerful. It only needed the simplest hacking, slashing, stabbing, and stabbing to kill the enemy. This was the reason why Supreme Tarot had spent 10,000 years in the virtual space to teach Jian Wushuang. Ah! The King of Day was furious. He stared at the void around him. His body was covered with dense sword wounds. Divine blood seeped out of the sword wounds, and it rained blood. Jian Wushuang's swordsmanship was so profound that it was far beyond his imagination. No matter how he attacked, Jian Wushuang's figure was like a ghost, constantly moving. He either blocked or dodged thousands of attacks and left a 3-inch deep sword mark on his divine body. He wanted to use an earth-shattering divine power, but once he did, the great Sun Imperial City that he had painstakingly built for nearly 1,000 chaos cycles and covered 1,000,000 miles would definitely be destroyed. Millions of people would flow with blood and be reduced to bones. Jian Wushuang, the King of Day, gritted his teeth and his body was covered in blood. Daybreak! Jian Wushuang's expression was cold. He turned a deaf ear to the Emperor God of Sun's roar and performed daybreak swordsmanship. He turned into an unparalleled sharp golden light and pierced through the chest of the Emperor God of Sun. Bang! In an instant, the King of Day's face turned yellow and he almost fell from the sky. Fortunately, the divine sun body of the Emperor God of Sun was much tougher than that of the Master of Blood Sky Palace. Under the rotation of the endless divine power, the sharp sword chi that Jian Wushuang had exploded in his body was suppressed. But even so, the King of Day had lost all his strength. King of Day, If this is all you've got, then prepare to die. Jian Wushuang stepped on the void, took a deep breath and said, "Sundering stars!" In an instant, the clouds in the void, the surging wind, the floating dust, and the palaces and houses in the capital all rose from the ground and gathered in Jian Wushuang's hand as if they had been guided. They turned into the purest energy and formed a blue sword light that was nearly 10,000 feet long. Sundering stars was the most powerful killing move created by Jian Wushuang. Slash! In the next moment, the Tarot Divine sword in Jian Wushuang's hand struck down with a loud bang. The overbearing and sharp sword pressure shook the entire area. Within Great Sun Divine Kingdom, a sword streaked across the sky, piercing through the sun and moon. All the citizens who noticed this scene trembled and said in disbelief, Did the King of Day lose just like that? Jian Wushuang is too strong. His strength is far beyond that of a top supreme martial artist. Will the King of Day be the second top supreme master to be killed by Jian Wushuang after the master of Blood Sky Hall? Discussions broke out. Inside the Great Sun Palace, Great Sun Prince shuddered as he watched this scene. Father! His lips trembled. At this moment, he didn't even have the courage to stop Jian Wushuang. He and Jian Wushuang were both in the elementary supreme realm, but only now did he understand how big the gap between them was. Above the King of Day Palace, the King of Day's pupils shrunk as he looked at the blue sword that covered the entire sky. He still had many trump cards that he had yet to use and many limit true treasures in his interspatial ring. However, at that moment, he was very sure that he would not be Jian Wushuang's match even if he used all his skills. Taking a deep breath, the King of Day lowered his head, looked at the palace, and shouted with all his strength, "Supreme Jade Cauldron, please lend me a hand." Buzz! There was no response from the palace. It was as if a pause button had been pressed in the void. The mighty blue sword light seemed to be caught by an invisible hand and could not fall. AI! A sigh was heard in the air. A moment later, a sage-like elder walked out of the palace. He was wearing a Taoist robe and holding a horsetail whisk, his silver hair tied up with a wooden hairpin. Every step he took was in the void without using any power. It was as if the heavens and earth had laid a ladder for him and lifted him up. Disperse. He looked at Jian Wushuang indifferently without any emotion on his face. He just gently waved the horsetail whisk in his hand, and the star-slashing sword light that suppressed the world suddenly went away with the wind inch by inch like a sand painting, disappearing into the void. Ruler Jade Cauldron. The King of Day's anger was slowly replaced by calmness. He stood behind Zhong Yu respectfully and saluted. "I've been entrusted by others, and I'm loyal to them. Great Sun, leave it to me." Ruler Jade Cauldron nodded his head at him. And who are you? Jian Wushuang squinted his eyes. He could feel that although Supreme Jade Cauldron looked plain and had an ordinary aura, upon closer inspection, he realized that he had already integrated with the great Tao of heaven and earth. His entire body was filled with the true meaning of the great Tao, but it was hidden. In terms of strength, this man was much more terrifying than the King of Day. He was probably already at the half-step unparalleled supreme realm. "I'm Jade Cauldron. You may not have heard of my name since you're young, but you can go back and ask the Blood Wave Supreme of your Divine Life Palace. He'll naturally tell you who I am." Supreme Jade Cauldron's expression was calm as he sized up Jian Wushuang. He then said, "Jian Wushuang, your talent is indeed outstanding. I heard that you were favored by the Lord Cosmos God during the gathering of all races in the universe. If it is possible, I do not wish to harm your life." After a pause, he said calmly, "Jian Wushuang, give me some face and let it go. Previously, you had all sorts of grudges with King of Day because you killed his son, the young emperor. In addition, you were indeed weak back then and you had a powerful weapon. That's why King of Day attacked you. Since you've proven yourself to be a ruler, we can naturally let bygones be bygones. I can make the decision on behalf of the Great Sun. As long as you back off now and never step foot in the Great Sun Divine Kingdom's territory again, I will not pursue the matter of you humiliating him. How about it?" Then, he looked at the King of Day and asked, "King of Day, Do you have any objections to my decision? I'll follow your arrangements, Supreme Jade Cauldron, the King of Day replied. He had no desire to fight with Jian Wushuang anymore. He just wanted to get the god of killing to leave as soon as possible. Supreme Jade Cauldron nodded his head in satisfaction. Then, he looked at Jian Wushuang and asked, Jian Wushuang, are you going to give me face? In his opinion, what Jian Wushuang needed was a way out. Now that he had given Jian Wushuang a way out, he was confident that Jian Wushuang would follow the way out. After all, if he were to really take action, it would inevitably lead to the discussion of the strong bullying the weak in the universe. If he won, it would still be fine. After all, it was only natural. If he lost, his reputation as Supreme Jade Cauldron would be destroyed. In Great Sun Divine Kingdom, countless people fixed their eyes on Jian Wushuang's face and waited for his answer. Your face. However, Jian Wushuang replied with a blank expression. I'm sorry. Jian Wushuang, have never taken the initiative to bully others in my life. However, if someone bullies me, I will definitely take revenge and return the favor 100 times over. Back then, the Great Sun Divine Kingdom slaughtered thousands of disciples of my Divine Life Palace, causing the death of many supreme beings. They even rewarded me with thousands of gold coins in the universe for my head. Now, you're going to let this matter go just because you want to give you face. Whoosh! Jian Wushuang held the Tarot Divine Sword horizontally and pointed the tip of the sword at Supreme Jade Cauldron. He said coldly, Let me tell you the truth. The King of Day is dead today. Even your Jade Cauldron can't save him. If you know what's good for you, then get out of my way and I'll let you off. If you're determined to protect him, then I'm sorry. I'll kill both of us, let alone you. Audacious! In an instant, Supreme Jade Cauldron's face turned ashen, and his eyes were filled with killing intent. He, Jade Cauldron, was a half-step unparalleled supreme being, and no matter where he went, all the overlords and giant arms would treat him with respect. Jian Wushuang, a mere elementary supreme, dared to humiliate him? You can try to see if I'm bold or not. Jian Wushuang looked at him coldly without any intention of backing down. Good. Jian Wushuang, since you don't want face, don't blame me for not giving you a chance, Ruler Jade Cauldron said in a cold voice. Then he flicked his horsetail whisk, and his entire body turned into a stream of light. Like a wave of smoke, he rose up and rushed into the 9 heavens. Jian Wushuang, I'll be waiting for you outside the star. Supreme Jade Cauldron's cold voice rang out from the sky. All right, he said. Jian Wushuang lowered his head and looked at Great Sun Divine Kingdom. If the two of them started a battle here, the entire star would be destroyed and thousands of people would die. Every injustice had its perpetrator, and every debt had its debtor. This was not what he wanted. Bang! Jian Wushuang stomped his right foot and instantly gathered endless sword chi. The last sharp and brilliant sword light shot up into the sky and beyond the stars. Above the King of Day Palace. The King of Day's face was gloomy and his eyes kept flashing. He had not expected that Jian Wushuang would not even give face to Supreme Jade Cauldron and was determined to kill him. Father! Great Sun Prince flew up and stood beside King of Day. He said, Father, it seems that Jian Wushuang is determined to fight to the death with the Great Sun Divine Kingdom. In that case, why don't we catch up and kill Jian Wushuang while he is fighting with Supreme Jade Cauldron? Oh! The King of Day raised an eyebrow and nodded. That's right. If we can't kill Jian Wushuang today, I'm afraid there will be endless trouble in the future. After saying that, the Emperor God of the Great Sun turned into a huge sun and chased after Jian Wushuang and Supreme Jade Cauldron like a fireball. Great Sun Prince wasn't slow either. A moment later, only the Ragal Great Sun Imperial City, the many citizens, and the guards were left. Quick! This battle concerns the life and death of the Great Sun Divine Kingdom. How can we miss it? Not bad. One of them is the #1 genius of the universe, while the other is a half-step unparalleled supreme being who has been famous for a long time. This battle is bound to be extremely exciting. Let's quickly catch up. All of a sudden, everyone looked at each other and used their divine arts one after another. They either turned into light or divine beams and shot out into the sky. The universe was boundless. The stars shone and the Milky Way stretched across. Jian Wushuang, you're too arrogant. You don't understand the meaning of the extreme hardness fold. Supreme Jade Cauldron's expression was cold as he held his horsetail whisk and looked at Jian Wushuang. If you focus on training for 100 chaos cycles and improve your cultivation base to the level of a supreme ruler, then I definitely won't dare to interfere. In fact, I might even refuse to participate in the Great Sun Divine Kingdom's ancestral worship ceremony out of fear of you. It's a pity that you've just broken through to the Supreme Being realm, and you're already so full of yourself that you came to seek revenge. You're simply courting death. Is that so? Jian Wushuang raised his eyebrows and his purple-gold eyes flickered. A shocking battle intent burst out from his body. What a coincidence! I was just thinking of arm wrestling with a half-step, unparalleled supreme. Jade Cauldron, let me see what you're capable of. Who gave you the confidence to interfere in my business? Bang! As soon as he finished speaking, Jian Wushuang took a heavy step forward and turned into a vast daybreak sword light that charged toward Supreme Jade Cauldron. The entire starry sky was left with only one golden light. Oh? Was this sword move from the Tarot Sword Manual? When Supreme Tarot dominated the universe, I was fortunate enough to witness it. In terms of proficiency and power, this sword technique of yours is probably not inferior to Supreme Tarot back then. Ruler Jade Cauldron exclaimed in admiration, but the coldness in his eyes didn't decrease in the slightest. This sword move is enough to threaten the life and death of a top-tier supreme martial artist. Unfortunately, it's far from enough to defeat me. Supreme Jade Cauldron shook his head and gently flicked the horsetail whisk in his hand. A ray of 7-colored divine light instantly shot out and hit Jian Wushuang with unparalleled power. Bang! In an instant, a powerful repulsive force appeared from the 7-colored divine light and began to disintegrate the daybreak sword ray from its original energy. Jian Wushuang's figure seemed to have hit an invisible glass. His charging figure came to a halt and then he was sent flying back thousands of feet. Da-da-da-da. Jian Wushuang took 3 steps back before he could stabilize himself. His blood and qi were boiling. So, this is what a half-step invincible ruler is like. He is indeed much more powerful than a supreme being. Jian Wushuang squinted his eyes. Then, he didn't hold back any of his divine power and it exploded. Again, a wave of battle intent erupted from Jian Wushuang and sword. In the next moment, Jian Wushuang appeared above Supreme Jade Cauldron and slashed down with the Tarot Divine Sword, carrying a strong sword pressure. Small tricks. Ruler Jade Cauldron coldly snorted as he swiped his right hand across the horsetail whisk. In an instant, the white threads of the horsetail whisk in his hand straightened up and became as hard as iron, transforming into the shape of a long blade. Clang! The Tarot Divine Sword struck the long blade of the horsetail whisk, but it was unable to cut it in half. Instead, it created a long string of sparks. Jian Wushuang, if the Tarot Supreme had the Tarot Divine Sword, I would have been killed in one move. But in your hands, the Tarot Divine Sword is just a pearl covered in dust. In the end, the gap between our cultivation bases is too big. Supreme Jade Cauldron sneered disdainfully. Then, he quickly changed his wrist and slashed out 32 times in succession, each strike fiercer than the last, forcing Jian Wushuang to retreat. Secret skill, Galaxy Slash. Seeing Jian Wushuang retreat, Supreme Jade Cauldron's right hand shook again, and the horsetail whisk changed again. Countless white threads grew wildly and combined to form a long steel whip, which swept toward Jian Wushuang. Peepa, peepa, peepa. This whip cracked the void and made a cracking sound like glass breaking. It caused countless QI activities to surge and set off a wild wind. Then, the whip landed on Jian Wushuang's chest. The violent power tore a long palm-sized wound on his chaotic, domineering body. This scene caused a wave of exclamations in the eyes of the people who had come to watch the battle from afar. As expected of Supreme Jade Cauldron, a half-step unparalleled supreme. His offensive power and combat techniques have already reached the point of perfection. The horsetail whisk in Supreme Jade Cauldron's hand is a replica of the 1000 Opportunity Whisk, one of the 7 supreme ancestral weapons. It can transform into any weapon, and its power is only slightly weaker than the real 1000 Opportunity Whisk. It seems that Jian Wushuang, who has been invincible all the way, is in big trouble this time. The audience's gazes were focused as they began to discuss. The King of Day and Great Sun Prince were even more delighted. Father, it seems like Jian Wushuang is no match for Supreme Jade Cauldron. Let's go, Great Sun Prince said. The King of Day smiled and nodded. His nervous expression turned into a relaxed one. Supreme Jade Cauldron is a super expert who survived the Great Catastrophe. Jian Wushuang is just a young kid who relied on his talent and some opportunities. Naturally, he is no match for Supreme Jade Cauldron. The King of Day shook his head and laughed. In the starry sky, Jian Wushuang lowered his head and looked at the hideous wound on his chest. His eyes flickered and he sighed. As expected of a half-step unparalleled supreme, he's already so mature in all aspects. He won't be easy to deal with. Hearing this, a look of ridicule appeared on Supreme Jade Cauldron's face. Jian Wushuang, now you know the difference between you and me? It's not too late for you to admit defeat now. As long as your attitude is better and you're willing to apologize to me in front of everyone, I can still let you live. Jian Wushuang, this is the last chance I am giving you. You must cherish it. After saying that, Supreme Jade Cauldron looked down at Jian Wushuang with a condescending look in his eyes. Hearing this, Jian Wushuang could not help grinning and only replied with 4 words. You are being whimsical. You're so stubborn. Ruler Jade Cauldron's face darkened upon hearing this. He coldly replied, Jian Wushuang, since you lack discipline, I'll teach you a lesson on behalf of the elders in your divine life palace. Bang! He waved his right hand, and the horsetail whisk in his hand suddenly turned into a divine brush. He drew a line in the void in front of him, directly drawing a golden yin-yang tai chi pattern. Secret technique. Seal the sky with one seal. Supreme Jade Cauldron shouted in a low voice as the horsetail whisk in his hand turned into a divine brush and he tapped it heavily on the yin-yang tai chi diagram. In an instant, the yin-yang tai chi pattern let out a low hum, spun, and rose into the sky. Then, it continued to expand and expand with the wind. In just a few breaths, it was like a curtain cover, sealing the entire sky and the surrounding area. After that, Supreme Jade Cauldron took a step forward and flew up. The horsetail whisk in his hand turned into a huge sky-splitting axe and he chopped down at Jian Wushuang. Innate divine power. Original universe. Jian Wushuang's eyes were filled with fighting intent as he activated his innate superpower. In an instant, an extremely powerful force descended on the world and turned the void around him into a dark magnetic field. Boom! In an instant, Jian Wushuang's aura soared again, and Supreme Jade Cauldron's flying chariot couldn't help but slow down. It was at this moment that Jian Wushuang said coldly, Sundering stars! Boom! The blue sword light condensed in Jian Wushuang's hand and slashed down with a strong sword pressure. The starry sky was split open as if it was splitting the sea. Oh! Ruler Jade Cauldron narrowed his eyes and sneered. What a surprise! But it's a pity that it's useless against me. 1000 movement, change. He let out a roar, and in an instant, the white threads of his horsetail whisk spread out like a goddess scattering flowers. In the next instant, the white threads merged together to form a diamond-shaped shield that firmly protected Ruler Jade Cauldron. Bang! When the astral slash sword hit the shield, a deafening sound was heard. It was as if the entire universe was experiencing a 10,000 magnitude earthquake. The force of the impact spread out in all directions along the shield. Quickly retreat. The battle between these two is too terrifying. All of a sudden, those who had not reached the cultivation of an advanced supreme martial artist among the spectators retreated and flicked their sleeves to resist the violent shock wave. After blocking the sundering star's sword radiance, Supreme Jade Cauldron took a step forward and charged toward Jian Wushuang like a wave of smoke. Come! The divine light in Jian Wushuang's eyes intensified. He held the Tarot Divine Sword horizontally and slashed out 99 streaks of sword chi in succession. They tore through the vast sky and howled arrogantly at Supreme Jade Cauldron. Boom! 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 The two of them exchanged more than 100 moves in an instant. Sharp and cold sword chi swept across, and destructive divine arts smashed everywhere. It seemed as if the entire universe was going to be destroyed, and black holes appeared in the void one after another. The speed of the two was extremely fast. Even though the audience had already used all their strength to capture the movements of the two people with their eyes, they were still much slower. The Tarot Divine Sword in Jian Wushuang's hand continued to slash and stab. The overlapping sword shadows were like a dream, giving people a feeling of extreme poignance. As for the horsetail whisk in Supreme Jade Cauldron's hand, it was ever-changing. At times, it would transform into a long blade that could tear apart the heavens. At other times, it would transform into a giant axe that could split the heavens and earth, and at other times it would transform into a long spear that could sweep across the world. The two of them kept moving around, from one star to another. They were like two divine lightning bolts that constantly crossed each other. They collided again and again, and the aftershocks they produced turned the surrounding stars into dust. It was as if they were going to reopen the chaos and cause the universe to boil. These two are too strong. No wonder Supreme Jade Cauldron is a half-step unparalleled supreme. Previously, the king god of the day was helpless against Jian Wushuang, but Supreme Jade Cauldron was able to deal with him with ease. He wasn't afraid of Jian Wushuang at all and could even suppress him. Jian Wushuang is the truly terrifying one. Think about it. Ruler Jade Cauldron has cultivated for thousands of chaos cycles to become so powerful. But how long has Jian Wushuang been cultivating? More than 700,000 years. It's been more than 700,000 years and Jian Wushuang is already on par with Supreme Jade Cauldron. What kind of concept is this? Even if I go into seclusion, it'll take me 70 million years. It's a good thing they didn't fight in the Great Sun Royal City. Otherwise, the entire Great Sun Divine Kingdom would have been annihilated. The difference between people is too great. The audience exclaimed one after another. Some supreme beings who had been cultivating for a long time sighed in despair when they saw Jian Wushuang's surging battle intent. Jian Wushuang, go to hell! Supreme Jade Cauldron frowned as if he was tired of fighting with Jian Wushuang. He quickly formed a seal with both hands. Supreme Divine Art. Purple Cloud Holy Curse. In an instant, a golden word curse appeared in the air, and an extremely powerful pressure spread out. It was enough to make all the races in the world submit. In the next moment, the curse was like a person carrying two huge cauldrons, and it came crashing down on Jian Wushuang. In the void, a passage of destruction was blasted out. Slash! Jian Wushuang's eyes were filled with solemnness. He slashed 9 heaven-opening sword lights in a row to stop the curse. Pong pong pong. The first strike caused the speed of the curse to slow down slightly. With the second strike, a crack the size of a strand of hair appeared on the seal. The third strike, the fourth, after Jian Wushuang's 9 swords, the curse could not hold on any longer. It shook for a while and then burst out with a loud bang. Countless qi and divine power of the Chinese shot out in all directions. Hugh! Jian Wushuang heaved a sigh of relief and beads of sweat appeared on his forehead. He had used all the divine power in his body to swing the 9 swords in a row. It had also consumed a lot of his energy. And at this moment, Jian Wushuang, go to hell! A ferocious laugh rang out. Then, the King of Day turned into a ball of fire and hit Jian Wushuang's body. This attack was the killing move that the King of Day had been saving for a long time. Bang! In an instant, Jian Wushuang's body flew backward under the huge force. He pierced through a star in the distance and flew back for thousands of feet before he finally stopped. There was a hole the size of a kuju ball on Jian Wushuang's chest, and countless sparks were burning on his body. Drip, drip, drip. The blood of the overlord body dripped down from the hideous wound and burned black holes in the void. White smoke was ignited and covered Jian Wushuang's body. Great Sun! Supreme Jade Cauldron's face changed slightly as he looked at the King of Day unhappily. Originally, he wanted to deal with Jian Wushuang even if he was bullying the weak. Now that the King of Day had launched a sneak attack, if the news spread, wouldn't his reputation be destroyed? Ruler Jade Cauldron, it's only safe if we join forces to kill this little thief. I'll promise you that I'll double your benefits later. All right? The King of Day laughed. Upon hearing this, Supreme Jade Cauldron's expression softened. He shook his head and said, "The current Jian Wushuang is just an arrow at the end of its flight. He's no longer a threat. He won't live past today." As soon as he finished speaking, Supreme Jade Cauldron walked toward Jian Wushuang with a cold expression, ready to launch his final killing blow. The King of Day and Great Sun Prince walked to the side, their eyes filled with killing intent and their lips curved into cold smiles. The three of them moved together and approached Jian Wushuang quickly. In the distance, the spectators' expressions changed slightly when they saw this. How shameless! Jian Wushuang is just a beginner supreme, but he wants to team up. The King of Day is the leader of a force and a top supreme. I didn't expect him to be so weak. He couldn't defeat Jian Wushuang in a direct battle, so he sneaked an attack on Jian Wushuang. It seems that the King of Day hates Jian Wushuang to the core. He will do anything to stop him, someone said in disdain. Someone sighed and shook his head. You can't blame the Great Sun. Since Jian Wushuang decided to raise the Great Sun Divine Kingdom to the ground, he should have thought of this. It's a pity for Jian Wushuang. He should have been a treasure of our universe. I didn't expect him to die here. Jian Wushuang is too conceited and arrogant. If I were him, I would hide in the dark and wait until the ancestral worship ceremony is over and all the guests have left. Then I will find a chance to slowly kill the King of Day. It's a pity that Jian Wushuang chose the most arrogant and high-profile way to appear, which is also the easiest way to be targeted. The crowd discussed in low voices. They had different opinions, but in general, almost all of them felt pity for Jian Wushuang. Pada pada. The King of Day's every step in the void made a muffled sound. He was like a death god approaching and announcing Jian Wushuang's death. Jian Wushuang, aren't you the number one genius in the universe? Didn't you want to flatten my Great Sun Divine Kingdom? Try being arrogant again. Great Sun Prince smiled sarcastically and said. Supreme Jade Cauldron, on the other hand, said indifferently, Jian Wushuang, I admit that you are very strong. It's a pity that you chose the wrong opponent. You shouldn't be my enemy. The three people's eyes were all shining with different lights, some cold and others mocking. They were confident that Jian Wushuang would definitely die under their joint attack. The waves of smoke that filled the sky gradually dispersed. The three of them were only 10 zhang away from Jian Wushuang. At this moment, a calm voice was heard from the smoke that had not completely dissipated. I didn't want to use this move at first. I planned to save it for Bing Yi. But why? Why? Why do you all have to court death? Bang! In the next moment, the smoke waves in the sky were all shattered, revealing Jian Wushuang's cold figure. The hole in his chest that was created by the King of Day God had been healed. His body was shining with golden light, as if he had the perfect body of a god. In his hand, the eye on the hilt of the Tarot Divine Sword became more and more ferocious. Waves of enormous sword pressure were released from the Tarot Divine Sword. Jian Wushuang, Ruler Jade Cauldron, and the other two immediately stopped in their tracks, their pupils constricting. They did not know why, but they felt a terrifying aura from Jian Wushuang. Jian Wushuang looked indifferent and ignored them. He raised his head to look at the boundless starry sky, then slowly closed his eyes and said, The third move of the Tarot Sword Manual, Dusk. Whoosh. The wind started to blow. The Tarot Divine Sword in Jian Wushuang's hand started to turn into sand from the tip of the sword and gradually disappeared. The entire world fell silent. The stars that were originally floating in the universe seemed to have lost their gravity and began to fall, as if they were about to fall into a bottomless abyss. What is this? The King of Day and Great Sun Prince sensed something wrong and frowned. A feeling of fear kept growing in their hearts. However, no matter how they spread their divine power around, they could not sense where the fear came from. They only knew that it was definitely related to Jian Wushuang. Ruler Jade Cauldron's expression changed drastically. The King of Day and Great Sun Prince didn't know what was going on, but he had seen tarot dominate the universe. So how could he not know? This was one of the 5 ultimate techniques that Supreme Tarot had used to dominate the universe, the sword technique Sunset. Back then, Supreme Tarot had used the Twilight Sword technique to annihilate 3 great races with a single sword strike, shocking the entire universe. Originally, with the death of Tarot supremacy, this heaven-shaking and earth-shattering sword Dao divine art was also sealed. Unexpectedly, Jian Wushuang had opened it again today. Quickly escape. Supreme Jade Cauldron's eyes widened as he roared at the King of Day and Great Sun Prince. At the same time, he stomped heavily with his right foot, and the horsetail whisk in his hand instantly turned into a flying shuttle, allowing him to step on it as he flew away at an extremely fast speed. What? The King of Day and Great Sun Prince were stunned for a moment, but they quickly understood what was going on. Supreme Jade Cauldron must have sensed the danger. Thus, the 2 of them also used their divine abilities in an attempt to escape. It's too late. Jian Wushuang slowly opened his eyes. Under his feet, the void slowly caved in, forming a huge pit. Then, it began to spread at an extremely fast speed. Rumble. This pit was like a giant Taotai beast with its mouth wide open. An irresistible suction force came from the center of the pit. Countless stars, galaxies, and everything floating in the universe fell into the pit as if they had lost control, and then disappeared without a sound. The dark night would eventually be replaced by the dawn, and the sun would eventually fall into the arms of the dark night. In the middle of this process, it was dusk. Hiss! The King of Day, who had already flown 1,000 feet away, saw this scene and his scalp went numb. The next moment, he had been charging forward, but he stopped. The huge suction from the pit that could annihilate everything in the world was like an invisible arm that pulled him back. He was clearly still maintaining his forward charging posture, but his entire body was constantly retreating, and then falling. If he continued to fall, until he sank into the pit. He wasn't the only one. Great Sun Prince and the other spectators were also caught in it. This was not the end. Even Supreme Jade Cauldron, who had been the first to react and had fled the furthest, was dragged back into the pit with an unwilling roar. No! Jian Wushuang, I will not interfere in this matter anymore. Let me go! Just as he was about to sink into the pit, Supreme Jade Cauldron stared at Jian Wushuang and said, "It's too late!" Jian Wushuang shook his head and his eyes were cold. Then he opened his mouth and uttered a word. Barry! Barry! Jian Wushuang stood in the void and quickly formed a seal with both hands as he shouted coldly. As soon as he finished speaking, the pit began to collapse rapidly like a black hole in the desert. At Jian Wushuang's current level, the superpower of sword principle was no longer limited to swordsmanship. Boom! 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 Earth-shaking rumbles were heard in the universe. First, the stars that had been swallowed by the pit began to shatter one by one, turning into nothingness. Then, Great Sun Prince, who was the weakest among them, felt like he was being crushed by heaven and earth. His divine body instantly crumbled. "Father, save me!" Great Sun Prince shouted in fear. Bang! In the next breath, Great Sun Prince's body and soul were destroyed, leaving only his screams that echoed in the universe. "Haoji, my son!" In an instant, the King of Day's eyes opened wide. Ever since the young emperor was killed by Jian Wushuang on the ancient path of stars, Great Sun Prince had become the last of the great sun god's blood and sweat. He was also the heir that the great sun god had chosen. If Jian Wushuang had not been there, the King of Day would have pushed Great Sun Prince as the king god during the ceremony. His love for Haoji was even greater than his love for Emperor Shao. But now, Great Sun Prince had been killed by Jian Wushuang in front of him. Great Sun Prince's last words stabbed into his heart like a knife. He was an emperor god, a top-tier supreme. He was the all-powerful giant arm that controlled the life and death of thousands of people in the universe. But he was also a father. Great Sun Prince died in front of him, and the King of Day went crazy. "Jian Wushuang, you deserve to die." The King of Day raised his head and stared at Jian Wushuang through the huge pit. His eyes were filled with hatred. "It seems like you're in a lot of pain?" Jian Wushuang looked at him expressionlessly, and the corners of his mouth lifted into a cold arc. "Don't worry, you'll be reunited with your son soon." Pong pong pong. The speed at which the pit collapsed became even faster. Waves of destructive power formed by sword chi continued to harvest life in the pit. Dusk fell and everything withered. From then on, the world fell into an eternal night. This was the true meaning of the sunset sword. Roar, roar, roar. The King of Day used his divine power to resist the attack of the twilight sword. Roaring. The blazing sun-like aura on his body was rapidly fading away. The divine sun body, which was also ranked in the top 10 of the universe, was constantly cracking and leaking chi. 10 breaths passed. The divine body of the Emperor God of Sun finally started to explode inch by inch. In the end, only his head was left, and he stared at Jian Wushuang. "Jian Wushuang, I curse you to die a terrible death. This king curses your entire clan to the netherworld. I curse you." Bang! Before he could finish, the head of the King of Day exploded like a watermelon. The life force of the King of Day disappeared. At this moment, loud rumbles continued to ring out from the pit, but the people watching the battle from afar seemed to have gone deaf. They stared at this scene in a daze, their mouths so wide that an egg could fit in. After a long time, someone said with trembling lips, "The King of Day, the hero of a generation, has fallen just like that?" The King of Day was one of the most powerful people in the universe. How could he be killed by Jian Wushuang? The young emperor is dead, Great Sun Prince is dead, and the King of Day is dead. I'm afraid that the Great Sun Divine Kingdom will no longer have a place in the universe. It's too terrifying. How strong is Jian Wushuang? Countless people said in shock. They turned to look at Jian Wushuang with deep respect in their eyes. Pong pong pong. The sword technique of dusk had not ended. Continued. That was because there was one person who was still holding on. That was Supreme Jade Cauldron. Within the crater, waves of destructive aura continuously crashed against Ruler Jade Cauldron. Meanwhile, Ruler Jade Cauldron was sitting cross-legged in the air. The silver strands of his horsetail whisk rapidly grew longer and longer before wrapping around him like an eggshell. No matter how the sword chi bombarded him, he remained motionless. Jian Wushuang, this move is indeed powerful. However, it's a pity that your cultivation is too much weaker than mine and you can't exert the battle power of this move. Otherwise, I would have been killed in one move. Supreme Jade Cauldron shook his head regretfully before changing the topic. Jian Wushuang, now that the King of Day is dead and you have taken your revenge, why don't you let me out? Are you going to waste your time here with me? As he said this, the corners of Supreme Jade Cauldron's mouth curled up slightly in a mocking manner. Jian Wushuang was expressionless. He had to admit that Supreme Jade Cauldron was indeed powerful. Even Huang Hun had not been able to kill him with one move. After a moment of silence, Jian Wushuang said, "Jade Cauldron, do you still remember what I said before?" "What?" Supreme Jade Cauldron narrowed his eyes and asked in confusion, "What did he say?" Jian Wushuang looked at him indifferently and replied calmly, "I've said it before, if you stop me, I'll kill you. Do you think I'm joking with you?" Boom! In an instant, the deep pit that had buried countless lives disappeared. The Tarot Divine Sword reappeared in Jian Wushuang's hand. However, before he could show any joy on his face, it was suddenly replaced by an unprecedented fear. Tarot Sword Manual, 4th Move, 4 Seasons. Jian Wushuang stared at Supreme Jade Cauldron coldly. In an instant, the entire universe changed again. The temperature of the entire starry sky suddenly dropped by thousands of degrees. In all directions, a strong and cold blizzard blew, freezing the entire star field. At that moment, the world seemed to have fallen into the bitter cold of midwinter. Countless snowflakes were falling from the sky, exuding a bone-chilling coldness. Each snowflake was a ray of 4 Seasons sword chi. This is the 4 Seasons sword. Ruler Jade Cauldron cried out in alarm. If he had been shocked when Jian Wushuang had used the Twilight Sword move, then he was terrified now. The four-season sword technique looked ordinary and was far less powerful than the first three sword techniques. However, it was far from comparable to the first three sword techniques in terms of concept and power. Could be said that the four-season sword technique was a huge watershed. The four-season sword technique was like a needle hidden in cotton, impossible to guard against, and the most insidious. Chi 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 chi. A poignant, beautiful snowflake drifted down. Ruler Jade Cauldron raised his horsetail whisk to block it, but just as he was about to do so, the snowflake passed through his horsetail whisk and landed on his divine body. In an instant, his divine body was sealed in ice where the snowflakes touched. He couldn't even use his divine power. This, Supreme Jade Cauldron's expression changed drastically. Before he could change his technique, the four-season sword technique had already changed. Boom! It was like the sound of spring thunder. The four-season sword technique suddenly changed again. The cold winter melted and turned into a warm spring that nourished everything silently. Chi chi chi, the cold wind and snow that filled the sky gradually faded away. What was left was a soft drizzle that fell from the sky. Midwinter, warm spring, scorching summer, and cold autumn. The four great solar terms were the four sword essences contained in the four seasons sword technique. Its complexity and profoundness were beyond one's imagination. Warm spring wasn't a sword move that specialized in killing among the four seasons sword intent, but it was the most dangerous sword move. The solar term of spring brought about the revival of all living things. Under the peaceful surface, there was brutal killing and plundering. Rumble. In the universe, it was as if the entire starry sky had disappeared at this moment. There was a continuous spring rain and thunder, as if it was playing a divine song of destruction. Ruler Jade Cauldron held his horsetail whisk as he stared at the world around him. The rain falling from the sky was sword chi. The rumbling thunder was sword chi, and even the gentle wind was sword chi. One after another, the sword chi filled the entire world. There was no way to avoid it, and it was an ambush from all sides. In just half an incense's time, Ruler Jade Cauldron's divine body was cut apart by countless sword chi, and a rain of blood fell. He was like a bloody man. His hair was disheveled and his Taoist robe was in tatters. He was in an extremely sorry state. Jian Wushuang, do you really want to fight to the death with me? Jian Wushuang looked at him indifferently and replied, if you can survive this strike, I'll spare your life. What's the harm in that? Good. Jian Wushuang, is this the reason why you weren't afraid when you faced me? However, don't forget that you're not the only one in the world who has a trump card. I, Jade Cauldron, also have one. Ruler Jade Cauldron took a deep breath, and the look of contempt in his eyes was replaced by a grave expression. The next moment, he said word by word, Supreme Divine Art, 9 cauldrons suppress the world. Break! In an instant, Supreme Jade Cauldron's body began to glow with divine light, and countless true intents of the great Tao appeared in his eyes. His already powerful aura rose sharply again. In the void, 9 huge cauldrons were formed. These 9 huge cauldrons were ancient and magnificent. As soon as they appeared, they were like the ocean-stabilizing godly needles that suppressed the raging sea, instantly freezing the overturned heaven and earth. 100,000 rays of sword chi, which were constantly emitting cold light and turning into spring rain, collapsed at the same time. This remarkable power was Supreme Jade Cauldron's most powerful technique, and he had once relied on this remarkable power to instantly kill a half-step unparalleled Supreme. His title of Supreme Jade Cauldron originated from this divine ability. Kachacha. The void seemed to be unable to withstand the 9 cauldrons as it shattered inch by inch. Explode! Ruler Jade Cauldron shouted with all his might. In an instant, the 9 cauldrons were like divine dragons rising into the abyss. They spun and rose into the sky. The 9 cauldrons were connected to each other, and muffled sounds kept coming out of them, as if the war drums of the ancient heavenly court were being beaten, deafening everyone. Boom! In the next moment, the 9 cauldrons exploded at the same time. An indescribable magnificent force exploded and turned into a destructive shock wave that swept in all directions. Under this power, No matter if it was the continuous spring rain, the surging spring breeze, or the rolling thunder, the wind and clouds were all blown away. At the same time, they were all crushed. Good skill. Jian Wushuang squinted his eyes and took half a step back. He opened his fists, and his fists emitted a bright golden light. The purple river character between his eyebrows became more and more dazzling, as if the god of war had descended. Come! Jian Wushuang struck out with his fists, and the shock waves that were sweeping toward him were continuously destroyed. Pong pong pong. Each punch was extremely powerful and had the power to blow up a planet. Jian Wushuang was like a warrior on the shore who was facing the tide. No matter how the shock waves hit him, he broke them one by one. The 4 seasons sword chi that Supreme Jade Cauldron had destroyed didn't dissipate. Instead, it began to evolve again. Winter turned to spring, spring turned to summer, summer turned to autumn, autumn turned to winter. The 4 solar terms were endless and formed a cycle. Once the 4 seasons sword chi was formed, it would be a life and death situation. This was the most powerful aspect of the 4 seasons sword chi. It was not like daybreak and dusk, where all the power of the attack would burst out at the same time and cause a destructive blow. It was like a millstone, moving slowly but constantly obliterating the enemy's vitality. After a few breaths, a blazing sun rose up, and a scorching and violent force pounced on them. The entire starry sky began to turn dry and red. As for Supreme Jade Cauldron, his entire body began to emit white smoke. Like a withered flower bud, his skin gradually became dry, and his hair began to fall off one by one. His entire body seemed to be roasted into a human jerky. His blood began to boil and then turned into smoke. A sense of great terror at the moment of life and death grew in his heart. Jian Wushuang, stop. I apologize to you. I shouldn't have meddled in the matters between you and the King of Day. Let me go. From now on, wherever you are, I, Jade Cauldron, will avoid you and respect you like a god. Let me go. At this moment, all of Supreme Jade Cauldron's pride and dignity had been shattered. All that was left was the fear of death and the desire to live. He looked at Jian Wushuang in despair, his face full of pleading. Now you want to beg for mercy? Jian Wushuang looked at him indifferently and shook his head. I'm sorry. I, Jian Wushuang, have always been a vengeful person. I will kill anyone who wants to kill me. Die! In the next moment, Jian Wushuang stretched out his 5 fingers and grabbed at the void. Bang! In an instant, the blazing sun formed from the 4 seasons sword chi shot out with a loud bang and ruthlessly crashed into Supreme Jade Cauldron. In an instant, Ruler Jade Cauldron's face turned ashen. With an earth-shattering explosion, the Tarot Divine Sword stabbed into Supreme Jade Cauldron's chest. In the next moment, Supreme Jade Cauldron's body and soul were destroyed. The half-step, unrivaled Ruler Jade Cauldron had fallen. He was also the one with the highest cultivation who had died at Jian Wushuang's hands. Whoosh! The 4 seasons world formed by the Tarot Divine Sword gradually collapsed. The Tarot Divine Sword turned into a golden light and flew back into Jian Wushuang's hand. The entire starry sky turned deathly silent. As Jian Wushuang held the Tarot Divine Sword, he felt a connection with it. You've become stronger. Jian Wushuang could vaguely feel that the Tarot Divine Sword had become stronger and more demonic after killing Supreme Jade Cauldron. Suddenly, Jian Wushuang recalled what Martial Sword Immortal had said to him at the banquet in the Divine Life Palace. The most terrifying part of a supreme great ancestral weapon was that it could continuously grow stronger. As for the Tarot Sword, it was the one that was in charge of killing. Killing? Can it make the Tarot Divine Sword stronger? Jian Wushuang's eyes flashed with a hint of thought. He immediately pulled out his sword and inserted the Tarot Divine Sword into the Tarot scabbard, letting the scabbard nurture the Tarot Divine Sword. The void was deathly silent. Only the strong wind continued to reverberate. The spectators who had already retreated far away looked at this scene in a daze and felt chills all over their bodies. Great Sun Prince was dead. The King of Day was dead. Even Supreme Jade Cauldron, who was a half-step unrivaled supreme and had an all-powerful cultivation base in the universe, had been killed by Jian Wushuang. No words could describe the shock in their hearts. Originally, it was already shocking enough that Jian Wushuang had killed a supreme when he was an ultimate ruler. Now, Jian Wushuang, who was a beginner supreme, had killed a half-step unparalleled supreme. This was too shocking. Such a thing had never happened in the universe. Whether it was the number 1 genius from 100,000 chaos cycles ago, the East Boundary, or the 9th Kulpa King, who had been regarded as a monstrous genius, none of them could compare to the current Jian Wushuang. Jade. It seems like the universe is really going to change. An elementary-level supreme killed a half-step unrivaled supreme. If I hadn't seen it with my own eyes, I wouldn't have believed it. Number 1 heaven's favorite of all time. From now on, the entire universe will remember one name, Jian Wushuang. Legendary. Jian Wushuang is a legend. From today on, there will be one more person at the peak of the universe, and that is Jian Wushuang. If the invincible ruler doesn't show up, I'm afraid Jian Wushuang will be able to sweep across the universe. Countless people spoke. At that moment, they looked at Jian Wushuang in black with deep adoration and fanaticism in their eyes. There were even female cultivators who were dazzled and seeing stars. If it were not for the rumors in the universe that Jian Wushuang had already married, they would have rushed forward on the spot and become his wife and concubine. No one present was an idiot. Jian Wushuang was powerful and had amazing talent. No one dared to say how amazing Jian Wushuang's future achievements would be. If not for the fact that Jian Wushuang's enemies, such as the Dragon Clan and Cosmos Temple, many people in the universe would have wanted to get close to Jian Wushuang and form a good relationship. But now, after Jian Wushuang had killed the half-unrivaled Supreme Jade Cauldron, these people suddenly became bold and fearless. Jian Wushuang has only cultivated for 700,000 years, but he already has the strength to kill a half-step unparalleled supreme. If Jian Wushuang is allowed to cultivate for another 700,000 years, the Dragon Clan may not be his match. The dragon race has lived in peace for too long, and they've been arrogant for too long. It's time for someone to teach them that they're no longer universe masters. The Dragon Clan sounds powerful, but it's just that. A few second-generation dragon clans who have been struggling to survive can only rely on sleeping to keep their lives. The remaining third-generation dragon clans may be powerful, but when Jian Wushuang grows up completely, he might have a chance to overthrow them. I'm certain that this universe will belong to Jian Wushuang after 10,000 chaos cycles. Countless people's eyes were burning as they spoke with determination. Then, they looked at each other and walked toward Jian Wushuang, intending to form a good relationship with him. Among them, there was a concierge who came to the ancestor-worshipping ceremony. He ran quickly as he was afraid that Jian Wushuang would vent his anger on them. He quickly tried to explain. Supreme Peerless, I'm Supreme Golden Saber of the Limitless Divine Sect. I've come to greet you. Supreme Wushuang, I'm the Island Master of 5 Turtle Island. I'm here to apologize to you. My participation in the Great Sun God's ancestral worship ceremony is because my ancestor is an old friend of his. All of a sudden, all kinds of fawning voices were heard. These people were all experts above middle Supreme Master level. However, they were all flattering Jian Wushuang and dared not show any disrespect. If this scene fell into the eyes of an uninformed person, it would definitely make one's eyes pop out. Jian Wushuang's expression was calm. These people were just grass on the wall that swayed with the wind. Fortunately, he had won today. If he had lost, these people would definitely have spat at him in disdain after he was killed by Supreme Jade Cauldron and the others. Jian Wushuang didn't pay much attention to them. He extended his right hand and the interspatial rings of Emperor God of the Great Sun and Supreme Jade Cauldron flew toward him. After grabbing the interspatial ring, Jian Wushuang used his divine power to scan the inside of the ring, and he could not help but be moved. The wealth in their interspatial rings was simply terrifying. Even before the Supreme Lightning Tribulation had begun and he had many supreme treasures to self-destruct, he was far inferior to these two. These two people must have stolen many opportunities from others because of their powerful cultivation. Jian Wushuang snorted and shook his head. He put away the 2 interspatial rings and turned to the Great Sun Divine Kingdom. Whoosh! Jian Wushuang turned into a sword light and crossed the sky like a shooting star. He then fell into the Great Sun Divine Kingdom. Within Great Sun Divine Kingdom, many people who had not rushed out of the starry sky to watch, as well as the royal descendants who had stayed behind to guard the Great Sun Divine Kingdom, were discussing. They looked relaxed and even had the time to drink tea. It seemed like they were not worried that the King of Day and the others would lose. Queen, His Majesty the Celestial Emperor and the others haven't returned after such a long time. Could something have happened to them? A guard from the Great Sun Divine Kingdom said with worry in his eyes. The queen was a beautiful woman. She put down her teacup and said casually, Jian Wushuang is only a beginner supreme. How can he be your majesty's opponent? Moreover, with the help of Supreme Jade Cauldron, Jian Wushuang will be executed no matter how powerful he is. This? The guard couldn't help but hesitate for a moment before saying, Queen, for safety's sake, I think we should go and take a look. Hearing this, Great Sun Queen frowned and was about to reprimand him. At this moment, accompanied by a loud rumble, a deep voice exploded like thunder and rolled down. The King of Day is dead. The other members of the Great Sun royal family are also guilty. Although they are not dead, their cultivation should be cut off as a warning to the others. Whoosh! Jian Wushuang's figure condensed in the void. In an instant, countless descendants of the Great Sun Heavenly King's royal family were scared out of their wits. They couldn't believe it. The King of Day's face turned pale instantly. How is this possible? How could His Majesty be defeated? Jian Wushuang's expression was cold and his black hair was flying in the air. He stood proudly in the void. He looked down at Great Sun Divine Kingdom, shook his head, and slashed down with his sword. This sword will strip you of your cultivation. Boom! In an instant, the sword did not seem to cause any damage. It did not even move a blade of grass. Instead, it directly cut into everyone who had the bloodline of the King of Day. This sword move was a variant of the Eternal Night Sword move. It had the power to strip everything. It was a small superpower that Jian Wushuang had derived after he had comprehended the sword essence of Tarot Supreme. Arg! My cultivation. What's going on? Why is my cultivation level declining? Don't! In an instant, the King of Day Imperial Palace was filled with screams. Countless people could feel their cultivation levels rapidly declining, and their faces were filled with extreme shock. The people who had come with Jian Wushuang noticed this scene and shivered all over. One sword to cut off his cultivation. What kind of supernatural method was this? One must know that there were nearly 10,000 people in the Great Sun royal family. Jian Wushuang looked at them indifferently and slashed out 4 sword lights again. The 4 sword radiances shot up into the sky and then hid in the void. From today on, for the next 90 million years, no one from the King of Day royal family is allowed to step out of the King of Day palace. The King of Day Imperial Palace has been sealed for tens of millions of years. Buzz! The 4 sword radiances hidden in the void turned their tips and would kill anyone who dared to step out of the Great Sun Imperial Palace. In an instant, countless Great Sun royal family members' faces turned ashen. Jian Wushuang did not say anything more. He took a step forward and turned into a ray of light. Jian Wushuang left. All that was left was the Great Sun Divine Kingdom and the disciples of the Great Sun royal family. When he entered the city, the entire city was in a festive mood, and everyone was smiling. After he left the city, the walls were in ruins and the place was covered in white. At this moment, countless cultivators who were still in the Great Sun royal city looked at the Great Sun royal family, who was suppressed and sealed by the 4 sword lights. They were all silent. They knew that the Great Sun Divine Kingdom was finished. 90 million years. For 90 million years, he was not allowed to step out of the palace. What kind of concept was this? Although 90 million years was a long time for a supreme martial artist, it was not unacceptable. However, for the descendants of the Great Sun royal family, who had been stripped of their cultivation and demoted to ordinary people, 90 million years was countless reincarnations and thousands of generations. This meant that they would never be able to rise again. No! In the Great Sun Palace, countless disciples of the royal family of the Great Sun Divine Kingdom were in despair. The Great Sun Queen even fainted on the ground. From being the queen of a high and mighty kingdom, no one dared to disobey her, and then to being reduced to a mortal who had to go through life, old age, illness, and death. This was even more painful than killing her. Among them, there were some disciples of the Great Sun royal family who tried to cultivate, but they were shocked to find that a restrictive spell had been planted in their bodies, blocking all their cultivation paths. "We're really finished?" At this moment, countless people fell to the ground, their faces full of despair. A few days later, the news that Jian Wushuang had killed the Great Sun Divine Emperor, Zhu Yuding, spread across the universe rapidly. In an instant, the universe was in an uproar. All the races were shocked and the world was in an uproar. The commotion caused this time was far greater than anything in the past. It was even comparable to the battle at the gate of the Divine Life Palace. The Great Sun Divine Emperor had died in Jian Wushuang's hands. Although they were shocked, they were not overly surprised. The impact of Zhu Yuding's death was simply too great. Zhu Yuding had a half-invincible supreme cultivation base. He had become famous thousands of chaos cycles ago, and had survived that Great Catastrophe War. Of course, Zhu Yuding was still weak during the Great Catastrophe War. He was only a high supreme, so he did not officially participate in the Great Catastrophe War. Even so, he was still an ancient almighty. However, such an almighty expert had died at the hands of Jian Wushuang, who had cultivated for only 700,000 years. This was too shocking. Jian Wushuang's talent and strength are unprecedented. A clan leader who was ranked at the top of the universe stood there, his lips trembling, and his eyes were filled with shock. "As long as the invincible Supreme doesn't show up, I'm afraid no one in the universe can stop Jian Wushuang now." Someone else took a deep breath and said, "Hurry up, pass down my order. From now on, all disciples of the divine sect should stay away from Jian Wushuang. Even when they are wandering in the universe, they should be polite to other disciples of the Divine Life Palace. They should not be offended. Otherwise, I'm afraid it will bring a great disaster to our sect." There was a sect master who was considered an overlord in the universe. He issued 3 decrees in a row that day, and each of them was about Jian Wushuang. The sects and forces that had once said that Jian Wushuang would definitely die under the Dragon Clan's oppression, or had participated in the killing of Jian Wushuang, either announced their apologies in the universe or quickly sent people to the Divine Life Palace to apologize. Some of them were from immortal orthodoxies, some were from ancient holy lands, and some were holy kingdoms. They were usually big shots in the universe and controlled life and death. However, at this moment, without any surprise, they all expressed their goodwill to Jian Wushuang. From the moment Jian Wushuang killed Zhu Yuding, he was no longer a junior who could be bullied by anyone. Instead, he was another rising star that rose in the universe and was strong enough to step on the top of the universe. As for the forces that were on good terms with Jian Wushuang, they included 9 Emperor Pavilion, Starry Sky Sword Sect, 9 Stars Holy Land, Maluo Clan, and so on. They also announced to the universe that they would form an alliance with the Divine Life Palace and become Jian Wushuang's supporters. At that moment, many people were shocked to find that Jian Wushuang had become an almighty in the universe who could stir up the universe and shake the 9 heavens and 10 lands. Countless top forces were connected to him. There were still people in the universe who were watching from the sidelines. Although they no longer said anything to defame Jian Wushuang, they were sneering in their hearts. Sooner or later, Jian Wushuang would still die at the hands of the Dragon Clan. All of a sudden, the universe was changing and all kinds of discussions were emerging. The name Jian Wushuang occupied all the topics in the universe. In the universe, in a quiet and lonely starry sky, the cosmic boat was constantly breaking through the wind and waves as it sped forward. Jian Wushuang did not stay in the cosmic boat. Instead, he stood on the deck of the cosmic boat with his hands behind his back and let the strong wind brush past him. His black hair was fluttering in the wind. Jian Wushuang looked straight ahead, his eyes constantly flickering. From the looks of this battle, killing a half-invincible supreme should be the limit of my power. Jian Wushuang's eyes were filled with deep thought as he recalled the details of his fight with Zhu Yuding. In that battle, other than the last move of the tarot sword manual, tarot, he had used almost all of his techniques. As for the other superpowers like the chaotic force in the Chaos Wushu Cauldron, even if they were used, they would not affect the result. The tarot sword was the trump card that Jian Wushuang had prepared for himself. It was also a trump card that he had never used before in the event that the Dragon Clan sent their strongest experts to kill him. It might be able to save his life at a critical moment. Unless he had no other choice, Jian Wushuang would not use the tarot sword move. He had yet to fully comprehend this sword technique. He was not sure what the consequences would be if he used it. The loss of control was too great. However, even so, at least I have the power to protect myself in the universe. Muttering to himself, Jian Wushuang smiled. At that moment, Jian Wushuang finally thought that he had the power to protect himself in the universe. He did not dare to say that he could sweep across the universe and defeat his enemies. However, he was confident that he would never need to return to the situation where he could only hide from people who were chasing him. After a while, Jian Wushuang opened the bamboo tube that Supreme Bloodwave had given him. The third page was marked with the Scarlet Sun Divine Kingdom. Scarlet Sun Divine Emperor, a half-invincible supreme who became famous 3,000 chaos cycles ago. Whoosh! Whoosh! Jian Wushuang stepped on the cosmic boat and kept flying toward the Scarlet Sun Divine Kingdom. The Scarlet Sun Divine Kingdom was his third target. At the same time, just as Jian Wushuang was steering Universe Boat toward the Scarlet Sun Divine Kingdom, many gazes within the universe were also focused on the Scarlet Sun Divine Kingdom. Through the previous two crusades, they finally understood that Jian Wushuang's targets grew from weak to strong. For example, the Blood Sky Hall Master, who had died first, was the weakest of the 6 forces that had killed Jian Wushuang. He had the weakest foundation and was only a top supreme. As for the remaining 5 forces, apart from the King of Day, who had already died, the weakest of them had already reached the half-step unparalleled supreme level. The Scarlet Sun Divine Kingdom is finished. Countless people shook their heads. Within the Scarlet Sun Divine Kingdom. Father, what should we do now? Your Majesty, say something. The imperial palace was in chaos. Countless commanders and ministers of the Scarlet Sun Divine Kingdom, including Scarlet Sun Demon Master's descendants, looked at Scarlet Sun Demon Master on the throne in despair. The news that Jian Wushuang had killed the Emperor God of Sun and Supreme Jade Cauldron was like a bolt of lightning that struck everyone in the Scarlet Sun Divine Kingdom. Even the Supreme King of the Great Sun and Supreme Jade Cauldron had died. What could the Scarlet Sun Divine Kingdom do to resist? At that moment, endless regret welled up in the hearts of countless people in the Scarlet Sun Divine Kingdom. Why? Why did he have to provoke Jian Wushuang? All right, stop quarreling. Scarlet Sun Demon Master's face was square, and his entire person was filled with a sense of authority. He slammed the armrest of his throne and glanced coldly at the people in the hall who were trembling like quails because of Jian Wushuang's name. He snorted and said, "Back then, when I was going to flatten the Divine Life Palace and kill Jian Wushuang, you were the ones who made the most noise. You wanted to get a share of the loot after I flattened the Divine Life Palace. Now, Jian Wushuang is powerful. He hasn't even arrived yet, but you're all so scared that you're all in danger. It's really embarrassing." As soon as he finished speaking, the originally chaotic hall immediately returned to silence. Everyone present lowered their heads. Not King of Day to look at the Scarlet Sun Demon Master. How could they have imagined that Jian Wushuang, who was only at the ruler realm, would have the cultivation to kill a half-step unparalleled supreme with a leap? All right, let's all calm down. Since Jian Wushuang is here, I'll naturally find a way to solve it. The Scarlet Sun Demon Master took a deep breath and said in a deep voice, "Report." At this moment, a divine general rushed in from outside the hall and entered it. "Your Majesty, Jian Wushuang is less than 3-star areas away from the Scarlet Sun Divine Kingdom. He will arrive within the next few days." The divine general raised his head and looked at the Scarlet Sun Demon Master with a terrified expression. "It's so fast." The Scarlet Sun Demon Master's pupils shrank, and his expression changed slightly. Then he stood up and looked at the people in the hall. He said coldly, "You guys stay here. I will bear all the punishment for Jian Wushuang. As soon as he finished speaking, the Scarlet Sun Demon Master stood up and walked out of the imperial palace under the complicated gazes of everyone in the hall. Before he could walk out of the palace, a deep and cold voice exploded in the sky above the entire Yunwu city. Jian Wushuang from the Divine Life Palace is here to pay a visit to the Scarlet Sun Divine Kingdom. His words were like a bombshell in the Great Sun Divine Kingdom. Countless people's expressions changed drastically. Their faces turned pale and their bodies trembled like screaming chaff. He's here, he's here. Jian Wushuang is here. The Scarlet Sun Demon Master's eyes also lost color for a moment before he regained his calm. He took a step and landed on the city wall of the Scarlet Sun Royal City. After all, he was the man who stood at the peak of the universe. He had been a hero for a long time and had long been used to the ups and downs of the waves. Although Jian Wushuang was strong, he was not so strong that he would be afraid of him. Jian Wushuang, I've been waiting for you for a long time. Scarlet Sun Demon Master looked at Jian Wushuang with a complicated gaze and said in a deep voice. He didn't call me by name anymore, which meant that he regarded Jian Wushuang as an equal. Oh! Jian Wushuang came over with his black clothes fluttering in the wind. He squinted his eyes and asked, You've been waiting for me for a long time. The Scarlet Sun Demon Master nodded and replied, Jian Wushuang. In this world, only the strong are respected. Back then, you were weak, so I bullied you. I was following the way of heaven. But now you are stronger than me. Even if you come to me, I have nothing to say. I am willing to accept my punishment. Hee, you're quite frank. Jian Wushuang looked at him with a faint smile. Seeing that Jian Wushuang didn't express his opinion, Scarlet Sun Demon Master seemed to be struggling. He gritted his teeth and said, Jian Wushuang, no matter how angry and murderous you are, I, Scarlet Sun, will bear it alone. Let my descendant go, and leave some leeway. After that, he saw that Jian Wushuang did not speak. So he took a deep breath, as if he had made a decision, and said again, Jian Wushuang, as long as you don't vent your anger on my descendants and strip them of their cultivation, I'm willing to commit suicide. As soon as he finished speaking, the people of Scarlet Sun who were watching the scene in the Imperial Palace held their breaths. They had never expected that the Scarlet Sun Demon Master would be willing to commit suicide for their sake. Even Jian Wushuang raised his eyebrows slightly. On the path of cultivation, the further one cultivated, the more selfish and emotionless one would become. As long as one could cultivate the great Tao, an ordinary person could even cut off their parents and Tao companions to verify their Tao, let alone blood and kinship. There were very few people like the Scarlet Sun Demon Master who were willing to sacrifice themselves in order to preserve their bloodline. However, Jian Wushuang quickly understood. The Scarlet Sun Demon Master probably knew that he would not be able to escape today and was destined to die. In that case, it would be better to exchange his death for some bargaining chips so that his death would be more valuable. After a moment of silence, Jian Wushuang looked at Scarlet Sun Demon Master and replied indifferently, Yes. Upon hearing this, Scarlet Sun Demon Master heaved a sigh of relief and looked at Jian Wushuang with gratitude. Many thanks. Then, the Scarlet Sun Demon Master turned his head and looked at his descendants and clansmen in the imperial city who had long been in grief. He rebuked, Remember, after I die today, you must keep a low profile, behave yourselves, and leave the depths of the universe. Cultivate well, and don't mention anything about revenge. Do you all understand? The Scarlet Sun Demon Master's voice was like a blow to the head, exploding in the minds of every descendant and clansman. When these descendants heard this, they immediately understood that the Scarlet Sun Demon Master had already decided to die and was leaving behind his funeral arrangements. The burly man couldn't help but say, No, no! Scarlet Sun Demon Master didn't care about them anymore. Instead, he looked at Jian Wushuang and laughed bitterly. Jian Wushuang, remember your promise and let them go. I'll taste the consequences of the seed I planted that day. I, Scarlet Sun, will go. Bang! He stretched out his hand and hit his forehead. Bang! After the Scarlet Sun Demon Master slapped the space between his eyebrows, his whole body began to tremble violently. His powerful and surging aura immediately subsided, and a painful expression appeared on his face. Scarlet Sun Demon Master was aging at a speed visible to the naked eye, and his vitality began to fade away quickly. In a short while, his face was covered with mottled wrinkles. Jian Wushuang stood with his hands behind his back and looked at Scarlet Sun Demon Master with a calm expression. He didn't stop him. It had to be said that Scarlet Sun Demon Master was a rarely seen magnanimous and responsible person. If it were an ordinary expert, he would have entered the vast sea of stars before Jian Wushuang arrived. Where would Jian Wushuang go to find him? As for his clansmen, descendants, cultivation partners, and disciples, so what if Jian Wushuang killed them all in a fit of anger? As long as he, the Scarlet Sun Demon Master, was still around, everything could be turned around again. But he did not choose to do so. Instead, he would take responsibility for his own actions and sacrifice himself to protect the lineage of Scarlet Sunday. Jian Wushuang appreciated this. However, it was only admiration. The blood feud of the Divine Life Palace and the countless dead souls of the Divine Life Palace could not forgive this man. They had died to protect Jian Wushuang. How could Jian Wushuang let go of the enemy who had killed them? After a few breaths, Scarlet Sun Demon Master's life source was shattered, and his body gradually dissipated. At the last moment, he stared at the crowd of people in the Scarlet Sun Divine Palace who were already sobbing. He used all his strength to shout, "Remember what I just said. After I leave, I'll immediately withdraw from the depths of the universe, behave myself, and concentrate on cultivation. There will be no more fighting. Not a single word about revenge. Remember, otherwise, I won't be able to die in peace." Wang. As soon as he finished speaking, the Scarlet Sun Demon Master's body turned into sand from head to toe. Then, he was blown away by the wind and disappeared into the void. The Scarlet Sun Demon Master, another almighty being with huge arms, had fallen. In an instant, the world was twisted and the great Tao wailed. In the imperial palace, countless people were crying. Jian Wushuang was expressionless. He lowered his head and glanced at the people from the Scarlet Sun Palace. In the next moment, countless invisible sword chi shot out from Jian Wushuang's body toward the people in the palace. The sword chi wouldn't hurt them, but it would make it so that the descendants of Scarlet Sun Demon Master wouldn't be able to break through to the supremacy stage for the rest of their lives. They would only be stuck at the ultimate ruler realm. As for the few remaining beginner and intermediate level supremes, he set up a restriction in their divine bodies. As long as Jian Wushuang thought about it, the sword chi would explode in their bodies and kill them. Scarlet Sun Demon Master's clansmen obviously didn't notice the sword chi, but the few supremes did. However, after they took a look at Jian Wushuang, they kept quiet out of fear and didn't dare to make a sound. They only pretended to know nothing. Bang! Let's go! Jian Wushuang took a heavy step with his right foot and turned into a flowing light, disappearing from the Scarlet Sun Divine Kingdom. With another flash, Jian Wushuang appeared in the vast starry sky. He released Universe Boat and sailed into the boundless sea of stars. Scarlet Sun Demon Master had committed suicide in front of Jian Wushuang. 7 days later, the universe shook again. However, the races in the universe weren't as shocked this time. After all, Jian Wushuang had killed Supreme Jade Cauldron before. In their opinion, the death of Scarlet Sun Demon Master was basically a sure thing. However, the only thing that made people feel sad was that Scarlet Sun Demon Master, who was a mighty lord of the universe, had been forced to commit suicide by Jian Wushuang. However, the discussion about the death of the Scarlet Sun Demon Master did not last long. Everyone's attention was instantly taken away by the Great Void Temple. Just 7 days after the news of the Scarlet Sun Demon Master spread, Supreme Bing Yi of the Great Void Temple made an announcement to the universe. Jian Wushuang, I will wait for you in the Great Void Temple. I will cut off your head. As soon as these words came out, everyone in the hall was shocked. They did not expect that before Jian Wushuang went to the Great Void Temple, Supreme Bing Yi would take the initiative to jump out and say that he wanted to kill Jian Wushuang. Immediately, Countless people in the universe had a wonderful expression. Everyone knew that there was going to be a good show to watch. Divine Life Palace, Bloodwave, Giant Axe, Big Dipper, and the ninth Culpa King, who came later to fill in the position, were the four lead Supremes. Several ordinary Supreme Beings and the Overlord, who had been in the Divine Life Palace, were sitting on the ground below them. Tisk, TSK. Even a half-step unparalleled Supreme is no match for Jian Wushuang. This little guy is growing too fast. The ruler Bloodwave laughed heartily. His strength was on par with a half-step unparalleled Supreme, and the fact that Jian Wushuang had killed a half-step unparalleled Supreme meant that Jian Wushuang's strength was already above his. The others also looked at each other and smiled. However, a moment later he said in a deep voice, Jian Wushuang is strong, but Bing Yi is not easy to deal with. Supreme Bing Yi is also a half-step unrivaled expert. He shouldn't be Jian Wushuang's match, right? The Overlord asked with a frown. Supreme Giant Axe didn't reply. Instead, Blood Wave Supreme's smile disappeared and he shook his head solemnly. It's not that simple. Bing Yi broke through to become a half-step unparalleled ruler several thousand chaos cycles ago, and he entered the Dao through slaughter. He's one of the most powerful half-step unparalleled rulers in the universe, far more powerful than Jade Cauldron and Scarlet Sunday. After a pause, the Blood Wave Supreme continued. When Jian Wushuang met with an accident in the Taro ruins, Giant Axe and I went to the Great Void Temple and fought with Bing Yi. It's just that the Divine Life Palace and the Great Void Temple had not completely fallen out, so I did not use my full power. Bing Yi, on the other hand, showed even less power than I did. I had already sensed that if I were to fight Bing Yi to the death, I would definitely not be his match. After saying that, the Blood Wave Supreme said something that made everyone present gasp. Bing Yi has hidden himself very well. I'm afraid he's not far from being an invincible Supreme. As soon as these words were spoken, everyone except for Supreme Giant Axe, who had a calm expression on his face and probably knew about this news, was shocked. Then isn't the Alliance Master in danger? The Overlord's face was filled with worry. That's right. Why don't we let Jian Wushuang return first? We can discuss the matter of the crusade against the Great Void Temple. Ruler Heavenly Dipper said with a frown. The ruler Bloodwave looked at the two of them and shook his head with a smile. Of course, we don't have to worry too much. Even if Bing Yi is infinitely close to being an invincible Supreme, he is still not an invincible Supreme. There is a qualitative difference. Even if Jian Wushuang is not his match, it will be easy for him to leave. When everyone heard this, they heaved a sigh of relief. However, the worry in his heart could not be completely erased. Within the universe, Jian Wushuang drove Universe Boat forward. He sat cross-legged in the Universe cabin with a frosty look in his eyes. Supreme Bing Yi. This person was definitely one of the people that Jian Wushuang wanted to kill the most. If the Blood Sky Hall Master, the Great Sun Emperor God, and Scarlet Sun Demon Master were accomplices, then Supreme Bing Yi was the culprit. The White Tiger Supreme had been forced by Supreme Bing Yi to self-destruct. The enmity between him and Supreme Bing Yi was absolutely irreconcilable. Supreme Master Bing Yi had led troops to kill him countless times. For example, if it wasn't for Whitehair Ancestors' help, he would have died at that time. Even earlier on the ancient Path of Stars, Qiulong was sent by Supreme Bing Yi to kill Jian Wushuang. If it wasn't for this incident, Jian Wushuang wouldn't have gradually become enemies with the Dragon Clan. Of course, Jian Wushuang had no fear of this. However, his hatred for Supreme Bing Yi was already monstrous. Waiting to kill me in the Great Void Temple? Jian Wushuang sneered. He had naturally heard of this declaration of war that Supreme Bing Yi had issued to the entire universe. This caused his killing intent towards Supreme Bing Yi to rise to another level. Even today, Supreme Bing Yi's intention to kill him had not died. Very good. I'd like to see how you're going to kill me. Jian Wushuang squinted his eyes and there was a flash of coldness. Within the Great Void Temple, Supreme Bing Yi sat on his throne with a sneer on his face. He was constantly stroking the blade of a dark blue divine sword in his hand. This sword was called the God Killer. Back then, he had tried to kill Jian Wushuang in the savage lands of the universe. but the tyrant's patriarch had appeared and saved Jian Wushuang. His sword, the icy divine sword, which had the same name as him, had been swallowed by the tyrant's patriarch. He had spent a fortune to buy this sword from an unrivaled supreme martial artist. It was as powerful as the Bingyi divine sword, and might even be stronger. Jian Wushuang, I'll use you as a sacrifice to my sword. Clang. Supreme Bingyi flipped his right hand and pointed the tip of his sword at the void outside the palace, emitting a chilling aura. Humph. Don't wait until I break through to become an invincible ruler. Otherwise, the divine life palace and the tyrant's patriarch will all die for me. He snorted coldly in his heart. He was also brooding over the fact that the tyrant's patriarch had destroyed his divine sword and sent him flying with a single punch. Men come. After a while, he put away the god-slaying sword and called out to the outside. Da-da-da-da. A disciple of the great void temple immediately walked in. Let me ask you, where is Jian Wushuang now? Is there anything unusual? The disciple kneeled on the ground and replied, Sir Emperor God, Jian Wushuang is rushing toward the great void temple. There is nothing unusual. Well, that's good. Supreme Bingyi nodded his head and sneered in a low voice. Jian Wushuang, Jian Wushuang. This is the first time I've seen someone so eager to die in the universe. Jian Wushuang steered Universe Boat and approached the great void temple. Along the way, he did not have any intention of concealing his aura. Therefore, wherever he went, a wave of exclamations would surge forth. Look! This aura is Jian Wushuang. Jian Wushuang's target is the Great Void Temple. TSK. Supreme Bing is not a kind person. This battle is going to be interesting. Jian Wushuang is indeed strong, but Supreme Bingyi is also a tough nut to crack. Many half-step invincible supremes have died at his hands. It's hard to say whether Jian Wushuang can gnaw off this tough nut. It's all up to Jian Wushuang's own fortune. If Jian Wushuang can kill him, let alone kill Supreme Bingyi, then Jian Wushuang can be almost certain that he is the strongest person below the invincible supreme. Let's go, let's go. This battle is unprecedented and rare. We must not miss it. Hurry to the Great Void Temple. It's going to be lively this time. I heard that all the major forces have sent people to watch the battle. Once Jian Wushuang wins, they will make him their new king. Countless people were discussing fervently. After that, they all flew in the direction of the Great Void Temple. Among them, there were representatives sent by the major forces. They had already brought the mystic light mirror with them, planning to record the details of the battle. Even the water sorcerer ruler and his two disciples, whom Jian Wushuang had once saved in the Taro ruins, had come from the extremely distant desolate area of the universe to cheer for Jian Wushuang. There was also Emperor Golden Crow, Commander Mountain Shaker, Stardust Ruler, and many others who were related to Jian Wushuang. Everyone was looking forward to this battle. 3 months later, Jian Wushuang arrived at the star domain where the Great Void Temple was located. The Great Void star field was already filled with people who came from all directions to watch the battle. Their flags fluttered like waves. Jian Wushuang stopped Universe Boat and walked out of the cabin. He heard a lot of noise and many familiar faces. Lord Bloodsword, good luck! Ruler Hao Jin had an excited look on his face as he called out loudly from afar. Bloodsword, you will definitely win. Go! Water Sorcerer Ruler and the other two were red-faced as they stood at the very edge of the crowd, waving flags and cheering. Your Excellency Sword doesn't abandon. Be careful. The Stardust Ruler, who was now all alone, clenched his fists and shouted. Jian Wushuang was slightly stunned. He glanced at the familiar faces and smiled faintly. Don't worry. Jian Wushuang nodded at them, then turned to look at the center of the Great Void Star area, where the Great Void Temple was floating quietly. He took a deep breath. Like a whale sucking in water, he sucked in all the wind energy within 1,000 feet into his mouth. The next moment, he opened his mouth and spoke. His voice was like a thunderclap, rolling down and shaking all 9 heavens and 10 lands. Bingyi, why don't you come and die? Boom! As soon as he finished speaking, The starry sky within 10,000 miles was shaken to the point that the earth and mountains shook, as if a tsunami had been set off. "Humph, Jian Wushuang, you're the one who should die today." Then, a cold voice came from the center of the great void temple and destroyed the sound waves that Jian Wushuang had turned into. Whoosh! A white flowing light shot out and landed 10 feet in front of Jian Wushuang. The flowing light shattered, revealing the figure of Supreme Bing Yi. "Jian Wushuang, only one of us can walk out of this star area alive today." Supreme Bing Yi stood with his hands clasped behind his back and a cold expression on his face. "Just what I wanted." Jian Wushuang's eyes flickered with killing intent. He held the Tarot Divine Sword in his right hand and pulled it out of the scabbard inch by inch. A vast sword pressure instantly descended on the entire area. "Then come." Supreme Bing Yi snorted coldly. With a flip of his right hand, a scarlet and demonic god-slaying sword appeared in his hand. There was no nonsense between the two. The two extremely powerful auras seemed to have taken physical form as they collided and pressed against each other in the void, setting off terrifying void storms. When the spectators saw this, their eyes narrowed. They knew the curtains were about to open on this earth-shattering battle. Boom, boom, boom. Jian Wushuang and Supreme Bing Yi stood 100 feet away from each other, and an extremely powerful aura pressed down on the void. The void was constantly shattered, and storms were formed out of thin air. The powerful auras squeezed and collided with each other, directly changing the magnetic field of the universe and repelling the surrounding stars. Jian Wushuang stepped into the void, his black hair fluttering in the wind, and his sword chi spread out in all directions. It was as if a peerless sword god had walked out of the heaven gate and descended to the mortal world. Supreme Bing Yi stood with his hands clasped behind his back. His silver hair fluttered slightly, causing the surrounding temperature to drop rapidly as a frosty sword chi suppressed the surroundings. Both of them were giant arms of sword principle. Before Jian Wushuang rose to power in the universe, Supreme Bing Yi was once known as the #1 sword principle genius at that time. All right, so strong. These two people's comprehension of the sword Tao is different, but they are both powerful, each with their own merits. If these two fight, I'm afraid the entire universe will be overturned. The earth will shake, and the mountains will shake. That's too terrifying. If the invincible ruler doesn't appear, who can keep these two in check? Many people who were watching the battle from afar gasped and exclaimed. The next moment, the battle erupted. Jian Wushuang used to run away like a dog in my hands. How dare he claim to be the hero now? Supreme Bing Yi sneered contemptuously and raised his sword to attack Jian Wushuang. With every step he took, the place where his foot landed would be directly frozen into frost. Ha ha! You've only reached the level of a half-step invincible ruler after cultivating thousands of primordial chaos incarnations. If I were you, I'd find a piece of tofu to smash myself to death with. Jian Wushuang's lips curled into a sneer as he slashed his sword towards Supreme Bing Yi. Humph, Jian Wushuang. No matter how glib your tongue is, you will not be able to escape death today. Supreme Bing Yi's face turned cold as he casually blocked Jian Wushuang's sword. He then leaped up and engaged in close combat with Jian Wushuang again. The one who can't escape death today is you, Bing Yi. Jian Wushuang squinted his eyes and his killing intent turned into killing intent. His entire body emitted a dazzling golden light as he continued to battle with Supreme Bing Yi. Pong pong pong. Boom, boom, boom. The two of them were extremely fast. In the blink of an eye, they had exchanged hundreds of moves. Countless sword chi burst out, annihilating all the starlight and causing chaos to boil. A vast amount of ruler divine power turned into thousands of icy sword chi and gushed out from the god-slaying sword in Supreme Bing Yi's hand, bombarding Jian Wushuang. Good. Jian Wushuang's eyes were filled with fighting spirit. Not only was he not afraid, but he also laughed out loud. His supreme divine power, which had been integrated with the power of great Taos, also whizzed out with an overwhelming force and fought with Supreme Bing Yi. Although there was a huge gap between their realms, Jian Wushuang was a perfect chaotic lifeform and his divine power was also 10,000 times that of an ordinary elementary supreme. Therefore, although there was still a gap between his total divine power and Supreme Being Ye's, he could still compete with him. Clang, clang, clang. The Tarot Divine sword in Jian Wushuang's hand kept clashing with the God-slaying sword in Supreme Being Ye's hand. They either stabbed straight at each other or collided with each other at a slant, creating a series of sparks. Every time the two of them exchanged blows, it was as if thunder had exploded, and loud rumbles were constantly heard in the void. Logically speaking, any ordinary true treasure, no matter how powerful and dense it was, would have been cut into thousands of pieces by the tarot sword. No one knew where the God-slaying sword had come from, but it had actually managed to withstand the tarot sword's overbearing attacks. Jian Wushuang, is this all you've got? Supreme Bingyi snorted coldly and slashed down with his sword, forcing Jian Wushuang to retreat 100 miles. The next moment, Tarot Sword Code, Second Form, Daybreak, Jian Wushuang said in a low voice. Ding! Ding! A ray of golden light suddenly appeared and Jian Wushuang turned into a dawnbreak sword light that cut off everything. With a destructive power, he quickly attacked Supreme Bingyi. The golden light was the only thing left in the world. The daybreak swordsmanship was Jian Wushuang's well-known unique skill, which could kill any expert who was not a half-step to unparalleled supreme. The majestic sword chi tore through the void and pierced through the entire sky, leaving a long white wave. Countless explosions followed. However, Supreme Bing Ye's expression didn't change in the slightest as he faced this sword. He lifted his eyelids slightly and said, Divine power, mirror flower water moon. Kacha! He didn't move at all, allowing the daybreak sword ray to crush through his body. Jian Wushuang's figure condensed on his back. Bang! A muffled sound was heard. Supreme Bingyi, who had been pierced by the daybreak sword light, suddenly appeared behind Jian Wushuang and stabbed him. Jian Wushuang's face was calm as if he had expected this. He raised his sword without looking back. Clang! Countless sparks flew as Supreme Master Bingyi was forced back by the sword. He raised his eyebrows slightly and said in surprise, Your reaction is quite fast. Cha-cha-cha. At this moment, the Supreme Ice Yi, that was pierced by Jian Wushuang's dawnbreak sword light, finally broke into pieces like ice. What Jian Wushuang pierced through Supreme Bing Yi just now was a divine power clone. Supreme Bing Ye's response is so fast. He's already set up a trap and turned into a fake body before Jian Wushuang even attacked. If it was someone else who had been careless and thought that Supreme Yi Ice was dead, they would have fallen into his trap. Jian Wushuang's reaction is faster. Didn't you notice? Jian Wushuang's backhanded sword attack just now was executed before Supreme Bing Ye's body condensed behind his back. In other words, both of them are predicting. They can predict each other's moves. Hiss! It's too terrifying, countless people exclaimed in admiration. In the void, Jian Wushuang and Supreme Bing Yi stood in a cold confrontation. Jian Wushuang, I'm afraid you've already comprehended the 7th level of the origin of sword principle, right? Jian Wushuang asked. Supreme Bing Yi narrowed his eyes and asked. Jian Wushuang did not deny it. That's right. During the 10,000 years he had fought Tarot Ruler in the trial space, Jian Wushuang's comprehension of sword principle had improved and he had reached the peak of the 7th level. He looked at Supreme Bing Yi with an expressionless face. This person was definitely a formidable opponent. If his guess was correct, this person's comprehension of the Sword Dao origin was not inferior to his. He had probably also reached the 7th level. In the early years, he had heard that when Supreme Master Bing Yi had just become a Supreme Master, he had tested the world's swordsmanship and fought with many almighty swordsmen to temper his own swordsmanship. Now, it seemed that the rumors were not false. Taking a deep breath, Jian Wushuang understood that if it was just a battle of that level, the two of them would probably fight for another 10,000 years without any results. Then, Jian Wushuang slowly closed his eyes and said, Tarot Sword Manual, 3rd move, Dusk. Hoo! A gust of wind suddenly rose between heaven and earth. Jian Wushuang's eyes were slightly closed and he looked solemn. The Tarot Divine sword in his hand began to dissipate like smoke and sand, starting from the tip. A palpitating feeling suddenly magnified in everyone's hearts. What a powerful pressure! The heavens are about to change. Quickly retreat. In an instant, the audience, who had already retreated far away, retreated again to increase the distance. Oh! Supreme Bing Ye's originally calm eyes narrowed for the first time, revealing a hint of surprise. Walala! The ground under Jian Wushuang's feet began to collapse rapidly with him as the center. A pit was expanding at an extremely fast speed, like a black hole that swallowed everything silently. A huge gravitational force came from the center of the pit and vortex, constantly swallowing all kinds of energy in the starry sky and turning them into nothingness. Even the sun that was hanging high in the sky and the brilliant galaxy that stretched across the sky for millions of miles were guided by this gravitational force. They rolled over and fell into the huge pit. Twilight Sword, Twilight of the Gods. Supreme Bingyi, who had been standing in the void and thinking, was suddenly pulled into the pit as if he had been pulled by a large hand. Instantly, the hearts of all the spectators trembled. In the face of this move, everyone knew that Supreme Jade Cauldron had lost the initiative when he had been dragged into the Twilight Pit. He had lost the power to fight and could only be worn down by the power of the Twilight Pit. In the end, he had been killed by Jian Wushuang's 4 Seasons sword move. Immediately, an expert from the Great Void Temple berated, "Jian Wushuang, release our Sir Divine Emperor, right? Otherwise, don't blame us for swarming you." Hearing this, Jian Wushuang looked at them with contempt and sneered, "Just you guys." Whoosh! As soon as he finished speaking, Jian Wushuang stretched out his finger and pointed. Suddenly, a sharp sword chi shot out from his fingertip and ruthlessly hit the loudest elementary supreme expert. Bang! In an instant, the sword chi pierced through the elementary supreme being expert's forehead, and the sharp sword intent directly crushed every inch of divine power in his divine body. You? In an instant, before the elementary supreme being could finish his sentence, his divine body collapsed and his soul was destroyed. In an instant, at that moment, the other experts from the Great Void Temple narrowed their eyes. They only dared to point at Jian Wushuang with trembling hands and did not dare to say another word. After doing all this, Jian Wushuang turned his head and looked coldly at the extremely ugly-looking Supreme Bingyi. He slowly stretched out his hand and grabbed at the void. Barry! Boom! In an instant, the dusk pit began to revolve, and an extremely terrifying and boundless energy crashed down on Supreme Ice. Even someone as strong as Supreme Bingyi felt his body sway and his cheeks flush red from the immense force of the collision. The next moment, Jian Wushuang, this move of yours might work on others, but it can't trap me. Supreme Bingyi sat cross-legged and took a deep breath. Then, he coldly shouted, "Divine power, ice sealing heaven and earth. Kacha!" As soon as he said this, the cold light on Supreme Bing Ye's body intensified. A bone-piercing chill that was visible to the naked eye spread out, freezing the energy in the void. The void was suddenly frozen. In just a few short breaths, the dusk pit, which had sucked Supreme Bingyi to the center and was continuously refining and compressing him, was actually frozen solid like an eggshell. Supreme Bingyi stood up, the corners of his mouth curling into a cruel arc. Divine power, heavenly wings of ice. Break! In an instant, Supreme Bingyi took a step forward and shot out of the dusk pit, which was hundreds of thousands of feet deep, and soared into the sky. Under his foot, the dusk pit that had been frozen into a glacier instantly crumbled into pieces, forming an avalanche that scattered in all directions. From this move alone, it wasn't hard to see that Supreme Bingyi was much more powerful than the divine power, mirror flower water moon, said Supreme Bingyi. Rip! He waved the god-slaying sword in his hand, and in an instant, thousands of copies of him appeared. Jian Wushuang die. In the next moment, these words came out of the mouths of the thousands of Supreme Bingyi, forming a terrifying sound wave. It was as if a god had opened his mouth and was reprimanding them, deafening the deaf. Kill! Boom! 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 Then, the thousands of Supreme Bingyi stepped forward at the same time and raised their swords to attack from all directions. All of a sudden, the terrifying sword chi was like rolling waves, and the momentum it emitted was enough to suffocate people. Is that so? Jian Wushuang squinted his eyes. He didn't dare to be careless at all, and a touch of solemnness surged in his heart. He tried to spread out his divine power to sense which one of the thousands of Supreme Bing Yi was the real one. However, he couldn't help but discover that every Supreme Bing Yi was exactly the same, be it the strength of their divine power or their aura and vitality. Jian Wushuang could not help but frown. In the distance, the spectators watched this scene with burning eyes. Some of the old powerhouses who were familiar with Supreme Bing Yi immediately said in a deep voice, Supreme Bing Ye's technique is different from those inferior cloning techniques. It might seem like a lot, but it's actually devastating. Each of these clones contained the full power of Supreme Bing Ye's attack. We can't underestimate them. Ah? Then wouldn't these thousands of clones be the equivalent of Supreme Bing Ye's thousands of all-out attacks being used at the same time? Immediately, someone exclaimed, Not bad. The eyes of the old expert who spoke earlier flickered as he nodded. That's not the most troublesome thing. The most troublesome thing is that the real Supreme Bing Yi is still hiding among them. Once Jian Wushuang is tired of dealing with them and his divine power is exhausted or his mind is exhausted, he will give Jian Wushuang a real fatal blow at any time. It's impossible to guard against. It can't be avoided. As soon as he said this, the spectators looked at each other and said in disbelief, Then, doesn't that mean that Jian Wushuang is dead for sure? The old master nodded, then shook his head and said, Nothing is absolute. If Jian Wushuang has a unique skill that can kill the thousands of doppelgangers at the same time, this skill will naturally be broken. As soon as these words fell, not only did everyone's faces not show any joy, they instead sank. These clones of Supreme Bing Yi weren't like those low-level clone techniques which were just for show. Instead, each clone contained all of Supreme Bing Ye's divine power. If Jian Wushuang wanted to destroy these thousands of clones at the same time, it meant that Jian Wushuang had the power to withstand 1,000 of Supreme Bing Ye's attacks. How could it be easy? Instantly, those who were close to Jian Wushuang, such as Ruler Hao Jin, 9 Stars Saint Sun, Water Sorcerer Ruler, and Stardust Ruler, clenched their fists tightly and felt their hearts in their throats. At this moment, countless people were silent. Jian Wushuang had fallen into a dangerous situation. Whoosh! At that moment, thousands of Supreme Bing Ye's shadows flew up and charged at Jian Wushuang. Jian Wushuang's face darkened and his eyes flashed with solemnness. He didn't dare to be careless and directly activated the strongest state of chaotic domineering body. In an instant, Jian Wushuang's purple-gold eyes shone brightly and the river between his eyebrows became more obvious. On his divine body, there were ancient divine patterns that crisscrossed. Break! Jian Wushuang let out a loud roar and raised his fist to punch at one of the Supreme Bing Ye's phantoms. A vast and vigorous power fell like a waterfall and hit the phantom ruthlessly. Bang! Suddenly, the world shook. The phantom shattered into pieces, while Jian Wushuang's body trembled and his face turned pale. Before he could take a break, the second shadow had already arrived. Wang! Jian Wushuang could only dodge sideways. After half an incense's time, Jian Wushuang gasped for breath. There were a few more wounds on his body. He looked at the illusionary figure of Supreme Bing Yi, which was still covering the sky, and a thoughtful look flashed in his eyes. I can't let this continue. Although each of these illusory figures wasn't strong and only contained the power of a single strike from Supreme Bing Yi, there were simply too many of them. If they continued to fight like this, he was afraid that he would be dragged to death here. After taking a deep breath, Jian Wushuang no longer hesitated and shouted, The fourth form of the Tarot Sword Manual? 4 seasons. Whoosh! As soon as he finished speaking, the area within a radius of 10,000 feet around Jian Wushuang turned into the middle of winter. Countless snowflakes fell from the sky and shot towards the illusory figure of Supreme Bing Yi. Jian Wushuang shouted again, Innate divine ability, life intimidation, innate divine power, original universe. Boom! In an instant, 2 extremely strong suppressive forces descended on the world again. The world was completely under Jian Wushuang's control. The power of the 4 seasons Sword Qi's icy blizzard, enhanced by the original universe and the intimidation of life, instantly increased dramatically. A gale whistled and landed on every projection of supreme ice with a chilling killing intent. Ka-cha-cha. At once, the thousands of Bingyi phantoms froze and their movements toward Jian Wushuang slowed down. What is this? Supreme Bingyi, who was hidden among the thousands of people, had a slight change in his expression. He could also feel the extremely strong power of ice. Under this power of ice, even his movements had become somewhat sluggish. It's rumored that Supreme Taro left behind 5 universe-suppressing techniques. This move should be one of Supreme Taro's 5 techniques, the 4 seasons Sword Qi. Supreme Bingyi thought quickly. His contempt for Jian Wushuang gradually disappeared and was replaced by solemnness. For seasons turn, Jian Wushuang quickly formed a seal with both hands and shouted again. Instantly, the biting cold wind and snow disappeared, and a spring thunder exploded out of nowhere. Chi-chi-chi. Then, countless drizzles fell from the sky. This drizzle covered the entire Great Void Star system. A Great Void Divine Hall cultivator's eyes were filled with doubt as he reached out to catch a raindrop. In an instant, the raindrop pierced through his entire palm. Not good. This was Sword Qi. Quickly retreat. The man immediately shouted in surprise. As for the apparition of Supreme Master Bingyi, which had been slightly frozen by the midwinter Sword Qi, it was instantly sliced apart by the overwhelming raindrops. With a loud explosion, it shattered into pieces. For a moment, the dense raindrops fell, as if a lute was played in the universe. The small strings were like whispers, the rustle was like a mess, and the big and small beads fell on the jade plate. How was this the spring rain? This was clearly a calamity. In just a few breaths, the thousands of apparitions of Supreme Bingyi crumbled under the dense raindrops, leaving only the real Supreme Bingyi, who was constantly flying in the void, dodging the Sword Qi raindrops and defending with his sword. Clang, 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 clang. When the dense raindrops hit Supreme Bingyi's god-slaying sword, the crisp sound of nails hitting a steel plate was heard. Beads of sweat began to form on Supreme Master Bingyi's forehead as he flapped his ice crystal wings continuously. With a single flap, he was able to cover a distance of 1,000 miles. Although he was in a difficult position, he did not pose much of a threat to him. Bingyi, it seems that your strength is only so. Jian Wushuang's expression was cold. He closed his fingers and sneered. For seasons turn again. Boom. Suddenly, as Jian Wushuang's voice fell, the spring rain disappeared and a blazing sun rose up in the starry sky. Waves of heat engulfed the sky and the earth, baking the earth. The extremely high temperature was enough to bake a supreme being into a dried corpse. Supreme Bingyi, who had initially felt slightly relieved, tensed up once more as he stared at the fiery sun. In the center of the huge sun, Jian Wushuang stood in the void. His black hair fluttered in the wind as he looked down at the human world. Godly swordsmanship. Hiss. If I didn't see it in person today, I wouldn't even dare to imagine that this spell was actually formed from Sword Qi. Ruler Jade Cauldron died from this move. I wonder if Ruler Bingyi can survive it. Jian Wushuang's strength is too terrifying. The crowd watching the battle from afar exclaimed in shock. Although they were far away from Jian Wushuang, the powerful surging energy was like the brightest star in the universe, dazzling them and subduing them. Die! Jian Wushuang's eyes glinted as he waved his hand at Supreme Bingyi. In an instant, the fiery red sun behind Jian Wushuang rumbled and rolled toward Supreme Bingyi. This move was currently Jian Wushuang's most powerful attack. Jian Wushuang. Supreme Bingyi looked at the fiery sun that was surging towards him like it was the end of the world and was instantly enraged to the extreme. Divine power, protection of ice wings. Supreme Bingyi roared. In the next moment, the pair of wings formed by countless ice crystals stuck in his back expanded once again. Finally, they became like a pair of arms and enveloped Supreme Bingyi's divine body, forming an eggshell-like ice shield. Bang! the fiery sun crashed into the light barrier formed by Supreme Bing Ye's wings, instantly producing an indescribable loud boom. This roar was like the wrath of the god of thunder and the opening of the heavens. It shook the world and shook the deaf. All the sounds were drowned out by this huge roar. Countless people who were watching the battle from afar covered their ears with painful expressions. There were even those with lower cultivation levels who were directly killed by this roar. Waves of shock waves swept across and crushed the countless halls in the great void divine hall into dust. The rumbling sound lasted for 3 breaths before it gradually weakened and disappeared. A huge mushroom cloud rose from the place where Jian Wushuang and Supreme Bing Yi were fighting and covered the entire area. Had Supreme Bing Yi fallen? At this moment, countless spectators who had recovered from their shock stared at the area covered by the huge mushroom cloud. Their line of sight was blocked by the mushroom cloud. Even if they used their divine power, they wouldn't be able to see through the thick haze. It was completely silent inside, and not a single voice of Supreme Bing Yi could be heard. Lord Bloodsword has definitely won. The Alliance Master is invincible. Your Excellency is too strong. Ruler Vast Ember and the others couldn't help but be overjoyed when they saw this, and they waved their fists. The other experts watching the battle held their breaths and did not even dare to blink. Supreme Master Bing Yi. Did he die or not? In the void above the 9 heavens, Jian Wushuang looked down at the place where Supreme Bing Yi had been. He did not look happy as everyone had expected. Instead, he frowned. He couldn't sense the aura of Supreme Bing Yi within the mushroom cloud. Normally, when a person's aura disappeared, it meant that he had died. However, for some reason, Jian Wushuang did not feel relaxed at all. On the contrary, he felt a great horror of life and death. It was as if he was being stared at by an ancient wild giant beast, and all the hair on his body stood up. Thump, thump, thump. At that moment, the muffled sound of a heartbeat came from the mushroom cloud. It was as if someone had struck the war drums of the ancient heavenly court. Thump, 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 thump. The sound was getting louder and louder, and finally dash, roar. The thick mushroom cloud that covered an area of 10,000 miles was torn apart. Supreme Bing Yi strode out. His robe was torn, his hair was disheveled, and divine blood flowed down from his eyes. Even the wide wings on his back, which were made of ice crystals, were blown to pieces. However, his entire person was filled with an extremely dangerous and violent aura. His bloodied face was covered in frost, as if he was wearing a mask, and half of his face was frozen. Jian Wushuang, you have forced me to this point. I have to say that I have underestimated you. Supreme Bing Ye's voice was hoarse and inhuman. It was as if there were 2 iron plates rubbing against each other in his throat. It's a pity that you can kill Jade Cauldron with this move, but you can't kill me. Jian Wushuang didn't reply. The Tarot Divine Sword silently condensed in his hand, and he was extremely vigilant. In the distance, the smiles on the faces of Ruler Vast Ember and the others, who had already begun to cheer, gradually froze. He didn't die? Supreme Bing Yi is indeed worthy of being a supreme expert among the half-step unparalleled supremes. How could he die so easily? Jian Wushuang, we are in trouble. The others sighed. All right, Jian Wushuang. The game ends here. Supreme Bing Yi raised his head and looked at Jian Wushuang with a strange smile. The next moment, divine power. I am the Frost Monarch. Boom! Suddenly, Supreme Bing Ye's aura rose sharply, and his entire body rapidly expanded as if he was being inflated. 1 zhang, 10 zhang, 1,000 feet, 1,000 feet, 1,000,000 zhang. In just a few breaths, Bing Ye's divine body rose from the ground and turned into a 100,000-foot ice giant. His entire aura changed, as if the heavens and earth were crowning him. An emperor's crown appeared on his head. His skin was covered with thick ice crystals, as if he was wearing a heavy armor. In his hand, an extremely wide ice sword formed from ice crystals condensed in his hand. He held the ice sword as if he was holding an ice mountain in his hand. Jian Wushuang was as small as an ant under his feet. In an instant, countless people turned pale with shock. What kind of divine power is this? I can feel that the current Supreme Master Bing Yi is at least 10 times stronger than before. No wonder the previous Emperor God Taishu was willing to hand over his position to Supreme Bing Yi and leave with peace of mind. It was because Supreme Bing Yi had hidden such a trump card. Previously, I said that Supreme Bing Yi was too conceited when he announced to the universe that he would kill Jian Wushuang here. Now, it seems that he is not conceited at all. He clearly has absolute confidence. As for Ruler Vast Ember and the others, their hearts were tightly clenched. Why? How did this happen? Boom! In an instant, Supreme Bing Yi moved. He stomped on heaven and earth, crossing tens of thousands of feet in one step, and stomped on Jian Wushuang. Jian Wushuang, my divine power is far beyond your imagination. Supreme Bing Yi laughed in a low and sinister manner, revealing a hint of madness. Under this kick, the entire world seemed to be under heavy pressure and collapsed inch by inch. Jian Wushuang took a deep breath and said in a deep voice, "Daybreak! Slash! Buzz!" Once again, Jian Wushuang transformed into a daybreak sword light and flew forward on his sword, ruthlessly stabbing into Supreme Bing Yi's calf. This sword could kill a god. Ding! Countless ice crystals flew in all directions. However, they were unable to even pierce through the layer of ice covering Supreme Bing Yi's skin. Sundering stars. Jian Wushuang did not let it go. A blue sword light that was close to 10,000 feet condensed in his hand and he slashed down again. However, no, it was still useless. It was all useless. An ant trying to shake a tree, laughable. Supreme Bing Yi shook his head and laughed in disdain. He casually swept his giant foot and sent Jian Wushuang, who was using all kinds of supernormal abilities, flying. Jian Wushuang's body flew backward and he spat out a mouthful of divine blood. Again, Jian Wushuang's eyes were filled with battle intent and his body glowed with golden light. Once again, he controlled his sword and charged towards Supreme Bing Yi, the fourth form of the Tarot Sword Manual, 4 Seasons. In the void, the sword chi that filled the sky turned into spring rain and descended upon the world. However, the 4 Seasons sword chi, which had previously been invincible and unstoppable, was only able to cut off the ice crystals on Supreme Bing Yi's body. It was unable to cause any damage to him. Foolish struggle. Supreme Bing Yi smiled faintly and slashed down with his ice sword. In an instant, the entire world was filled with this sword. The vast chi activity caused the universe to boil, as if it was going to reopen the chaos and create a new world. The 4 Seasons sword chi was crushed to pieces. Boom! Then, the sword fell on Jian Wushuang and sent him flying. Under the sword, even though Jian Wushuang had chaotic domineering body, he was destroyed. Jian Wushuang, you're not the only genius in the world, and you're not the only person with extraordinary superpower. The corners of Supreme Bing Yi's mouth curled into a mocking smile. You won't be able to catch up to my divine arts even if you cultivate for tens of thousands of years. Do you understand? After a few breaths, Jian Wushuang's divine body reassembled. He took a deep breath and stood up from the ground. He looked at Supreme Bing Yi, who seemed to have victory in his hands, and his expression suddenly calmed down. Bing Yi, you really won? Upon hearing this, Supreme Bing Yi raised his eyebrows and looked at Jian Wushuang with interest. He said, "Oh? Jian Wushuang, if you have any other tricks up your sleeve, just use them. I'll take them all on." "All right," he said. What answered him was Jian Wushuang's calm voice. The next moment, Jian Wushuang opened his arms and closed his eyes, as if he was embracing heaven and earth. His black hair gradually floated up. A calm and slow voice came out of his mouth, one word at a time. Tarot Sword Manual, 5th Move, Tarot. Jian Wushuang. Is he going to be defeated? Ruler Hao Jin and the others looked up at Jian Wushuang, who was trembling in the void and continuously being sent flying by Supreme Bing Yi, and their hearts turned cold. The others were also silent, their expressions complicated. After a long time, they sighed and said, "Jian Wushuang is indeed powerful. and each of his divine techniques can be called a unique skill of the universe. However, it's a pity that he has cultivated for too short a time. His cultivation foundation is far inferior to Supreme Bing Ye's. I'm sure that if Jian Wushuang were to cultivate for another 10 million years, perhaps Jian Wushuang can easily defeat Supreme Bing Yi. Jian Wushuang did not have much time left. Countless people looked at each other, their hearts silent. Jian Wushuang's defeat was a foregone conclusion. The disciples of the Great Void Divine Hall looked at the 100,000 feet tall Supreme Bing Yi and were all excited. They waved their fists and shouted, "Master Bing Yi is unbeatable. Jian Wushuang is just an ant. How would he dare to compete with Master Bing Yi? He's just a weakling. Is he trying to show off?" In the starry sky of the Great Void, Supreme Bing Ye's expression was cold, as if he was a god who controlled life and death. He was about to sentence Jian Wushuang to death. At this moment, even the races in the universe who were watching the battle through the Xuanguang mirror shook their heads and stood up, ready to recall the emissaries who had sent gifts to the Divine Life Palace. Jian Wushuang was dead for sure. This scene played out in every corner of the universe at the same time, until Tarot Sword Manual, 5th move, Tarot. As soon as Jian Wushuang finished speaking, the entire universe and starry sky rumbled. It was not just the space where Jian Wushuang and Supreme Bing Yi had fought, but the entire universe. Whoosh! The sky began to tear and the wind suddenly blew in all directions. With Jian Wushuang as the center, an aura spread out for thousands of feet. There were countless people watching the battle in the distance. All the cultivators who had entered the path of swordsmanship, whether they had their swords hanging on their waists or lying quietly in their interspatial rings, were shocked. At this moment, they all let out a loud and clear sound. Countless sword chi shot up to the 9 heavens. It was as if he was welcoming the ancient sword god who was about to descend to the world. Stepping into the void, Jian Wushuang's aura changed little by little. His aura had become unfamiliar, sharp, and domineering. Supreme Bing Yi raised his huge ice crystal sword and was just about to slash down when he stopped and frowned. Jian Wushuang's appearance had not changed. Jian Wushuang was standing in front of him, but he was still in the elementary supreme realm. However, for some reason, Jian Wushuang's body suddenly emitted an aura that made him feel frightened. He's not Jian Wushuang. An outrageous thought rose in Supreme Bing Ye's mind as he shouted, "Stop him!" Although he did not know what had happened to Jian Wushuang, he could vaguely feel that Jian Wushuang was in extreme danger. "Go to hell!" Supreme Bing Yi sneered, and the huge ice crystal sword in his hand slashed toward Jian Wushuang like a collapsing mountain. Swish! The speed of the sword was extremely fast. Jian Wushuang was smiling like an idiot. He closed his eyes tightly and waited for the sword to land. Seeing this, the disciples of the Great Void Temple burst into laughter. "Ha ha ha! I thought Jian Wushuang had some big move up his sleeve. It turns out that he's just waiting for death. How pretentious!" Even Supreme Bing Yi, who had been slightly nervous, relaxed. Just as the sword was about to land on Jian Wushuang's head, boom! Jian Wushuang suddenly opened his eyes. 2 earth-shaking divine lights burst out from his eyes. Countless immortal radiance swirled up as if it was welcoming the arrival of the sovereigns of heaven and earth. Countless starlight surged from all directions and enveloped Jian Wushuang's divine body in a brilliant starlight. He was full of divinity. In the distance, the countless divine swords shrieked and trembled madly. Even the sword owners lost their sense of connection with their swords and were unable to recall them. What is this? Under the shocked and dazed eyes of countless people, Jian Wushuang slowly opened his mouth. A low, hoarse, but extremely sharp voice came out of Jian Wushuang's mouth. "I am Tarot." Thump! The heavenly divine gate suddenly opened and a golden light beam fell from the sky. On Jian Wushuang's back, it formed an illusionary image that wore a green robe, walking on a sword, holding a gourd, and drinking the entire world. The huge ice crystal sword that was slashing down was shattered instantly. What? How did this happen? Supreme Bing Ye's expression was dazed. He was very familiar with this figure. Who else could it be but Supreme Taro? 300 chaos cycles ago, Supreme Taro had swept through the entire universe as a supreme cultivator. He had been undefeated in 10,000 battles and had suppressed the 9 heavens and 10 lands. He was simply invincible. Supreme Bingyi had also been a top supreme realm cultivator in the past and had entered the Tao with the sword. At that time, he was testing his sword Tao. He used many mighty swordsmen as stepping stones to integrate his own sword principle. At that time, Supreme Taro was like the sun in the sky, so how could he let him go? He had challenged Taro to a battle at the peak of the universe, but he had been utterly defeated in that battle. All it took was a single sword strike. Supreme Bing Yi had been defeated. From then on, Supreme Taro had become a nightmare for Supreme Bing Yi. The reason why he had such a strong killing intent towards Jian Wushuang was because of this. How is that possible? What's going on? Supreme Bing Yi stared at Jian Wushuang and growled continuously. The aura coming from Jian Wushuang almost suffocated him and made him tremble. He could not compare to Jian Wushuang at all. In the distance, more people were frozen as if they had been struck by lightning. Their minds were filled with thoughts and stormy waves. Supreme Taro. It's the aura of Supreme Taro. Not bad. I was fortunate enough to have met Supreme Taro once before he died. And I'm absolutely certain that this is his aura. A veteran powerhouse took a deep breath and said in a serious tone. There was also an old friend of Supreme Taro, who said with tears streaming down his face, "Fellow Taoist Taro, we parted ways 300 chaos cycles ago, separating life from death. I thought that we would never meet again in this life. I didn't think that we would meet again here." Countless people sighed. However, even more people were puzzled. What was going on? Only Jian Wushuang knew the answer. Above the 9 heavens, Jian Wushuang was expressionless as he looked down at Supreme Bing Yi and said coldly, "Who's the ant now?" A powerful aura and pressure descended upon Supreme Bing Yi, causing him to gradually kneel and prostrate himself on the ground. "No! Supreme Taro is already dead. You can't be Supremacy Taro. I don't believe it." Supreme Bing Yi clenched his fists tightly and gritted his teeth. The next moment, "Jian Wushuang, even if you are Supreme Taro, I will still kill you today, let alone the fact that you are not Taro." Roar. There was a crazed look in Supreme Bing Yi's eyes as he stood up from the pressure of the sword. Then, he smacked the void with his right hand and jumped up to kill Jian Wushuang. Divine technique. Destruction. Roar. At this moment, Supreme Bing Yi's entire body was burning with divine power, and his entire being was filled with an extremely dangerous aura. With every step he took, a pit was created in the void, and an earth-shaking explosion was heard. "Come on, Jian Wushuang. If I'm going to die, you'll die too." Supreme Bing Yi laughed madly, his eyes filled with a crazed look. He hated Supreme Taro. Back then, they had the same cultivation base, but Supreme Taro was much stronger than him and had reached the peak of the universe. He hated Jian Wushuang, who was such a rare talent. Jian Wushuang's cultivation was much lower than his, but he could still fight with him and force him to fight to the death. The heavens were so unfair. First, there was Supreme Taro, and now Jian Wushuang had appeared. When had the heavens ever dote on him? Boom! 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 Supreme Bing Yi closed in madly, his aura expanding like a bomb that was about to explode. It was extremely dangerous. Not good. Let's quickly retreat. Supreme Bing Yi is going all out. Supreme Bing Yi is already prepared to die in this attack. He wants to drag Jian Wushuang down with him. He's crazy. Supreme Master Bing Yi has gone completely crazy. At this moment, countless people who were watching the battle from afar were so angry that their eyes were about to pop out of their sockets. They were shocked and angry to the extreme, and they hurriedly used their divine techniques to escape. One had to know that Supreme Bing Yi's destructive divine techniques was the most powerful forbidden technique of the Great Void Temple. Not only did it destroy the enemy, it also destroyed the user. The power that erupted in that instant was enough to drag all of them who were watching the battle into destruction. Ha 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 ha! You want to escape? Anyone who comes here today must die. Upon seeing this, Supreme Bing Yi let out a maniacal laugh and quickly formed hand seals. He immediately executed the sky-sealing divine technique and sealed the surrounding 100,000 miles of space. The spectators who were retreating suddenly stopped, as if they had hit an invisible wall. All the mighty beings of the myriad races across the universe who were watching the battle through the Xuanguang mirror turned pale. Divine Life Palace, Supreme Divine Palace, Supreme Blood Wave Supreme, Supreme Junfu, and the others raised their heads and stared at the Xuanguang mirror. They were so solemn that one could hear a pin drop. Just as Supreme Bing Yi unleashed his destructive divine technique. Bastard! Supreme Blood Wave stood up abruptly, a sharp glint in his eyes. In order to kill Jian Wushuang, Supreme Bing Yi has lost his mind and disregarded the consequences. He really deserves to be killed. Although the other supreme martial artists did not say anything, their faces were extremely dark. Similar scenes were happening all across the universe. In the starry sky above the Great Void Temple, there were cries of fear and begging for mercy. No! Let us go! Supreme Bing Yi, your target is Jian Wushuang. It has nothing to do with us. Right? You can just target Jian Wushuang. Someone tried to rouse Supreme Bing Yi's rationality. Bing Yi, if you do this, you will drag the entire Great Void Temple into a land of eternal damnation. Stop! There were also people who tried to threaten Supreme Bing Yi. However, when Supreme Bing Yi saw this, he laughed even more madly. Ha ha ha, are you guys afraid? If you don't want to be buried with me, it's easy. Kill Jian Wushuang with me. Everyone's hearts trembled at his words. Immediately, a few of them looked at Jian Wushuang and their eyes revealed their struggle. Jian Wushuang, who was at the center of the destruction, had an indifferent expression on his face the entire time. He was expressionless. Jian Wushuang's black hair fluttered in the wind as he faced the incoming Supreme Bing Yi. Starlight surrounded his body as he calmly spat out a word. Slash! In the next moment, Jian Wushuang slowly raised his hand and the Tarot Divine Sword in his hand was raised. Behind him, the huge shadow of Supreme Tarot followed him like a shadow. He also raised his hand and made a sword-slashing motion. At that moment, Jian Wushuang and Supreme Tarot merged. Buzz! Suddenly, a scarlet sword light shot out from the Tarot Divine Sword. Rumble! Thunder rumbled. No words could be used to describe this poignant and beautiful sword. It was as if the universe had been split into two, and the sky was torn apart like a scroll. The boundless night sky was torn open, turning into a long hole in the broken void. It was like a hidden dragon rising to the sky, or like a heavenly river flowing backward. This sword covered the sun and the moon, suppressing the sky. This sword was enough to make all the races bow down to him and suppress all those who were not convinced. After the sword was slashed out, Supreme Bing Yi's maniacal laughter, the begging and threatening voices of the spectators all came to an abrupt stop. Everyone held their breath as they stared at the dazzling sword that filled the entire starry sky. This sword's brilliant might could not be seen by the naked eye. Swish! In the next moment, the sword cut through Supreme Bing Yi's divine body as if it was tofu. Supreme Bing Yi continued to stomp on the ground as he charged forward. However, there was a huge hole as thick as a tree trunk on his chest. No divine blood spilled out, no divine power scattered, and no ice crystals flew out. This sword strike had destroyed everything Supreme Bing Yi had possessed. Plop! Supreme Bing Yi's huge body knelt on the ground. He lowered his head and stared blankly at the gradually expanding hole in his chest. His crazed expression slowly froze and was replaced by disbelief. I've been defeated. Whoosh! His godly body shrank quickly and returned to its normal state. The ice crystals on his skin disappeared like sand. He could sense that his vast life force and divine power were rapidly dissipating. The world in front of him turned black quickly. He saw that Jian Wushuang had become extremely weak after he had unleashed his sword strike. The phantom image of Supreme Tarot behind him had started to collapse inch by inch. If he attacked now, he would definitely be able to kill Jian Wushuang. However, he had no chance. Just when he thought he was about to die. In this world, A sigh suddenly sounded. Bing Yi, you have disappointed me. In the next moment, a middle-aged man wearing a crown, a black gold nine-clawed dragon robe, and a purple gold crown walked out of the void. He was bathed in lightning. Great Void Divine Emperor. The true person behind the scenes of the Great Void Temple was also the mighty figure that founded the Great Void Temple. It was the invincible Supreme Realm Cultivator, the Great Void Divine Emperor. In an instant, the spectators who had heaved a sigh of relief after the crisis was averted cried out in surprise. Jian Wushuang, let's drop this matter. Great Void Divine Emperor's eyes flashed with lightning and he looked indifferently at Jian Wushuang, who was using the Tarot Divine Sword to support his body and was on the verge of collapsing after his divine power was drained. His words were very calm, but they were filled with an unquestionable might. Cough, cough, cough. As Jian Wushuang coughed violently, he raised his head and looked at the real monster of the universe, the Great Void Divine Emperor, who stood at the peak of the universe. Great Void Divine Emperor. He was the founder of the Great Void Temple, a powerful being who had truly expanded his territory and suppressed an area of the universe. In the entire universe, the number of people who could stand shoulder to shoulder with him could be counted on two hands. If they were not the patriarchs of a race, then they were the leaders of the immortal Holy Lands. After his appearance, the entire universe suddenly fell into a dead silence. Everyone looked at Great Void Divine Emperor and lowered their heads, not even daring to breathe. Jian Wushuang, I don't care about the grudges between the two of you. From now on, let's forget about all the past. How about it? Great Void Divine Emperor looked at Jian Wushuang indifferently and said. After he finished speaking, he waved his sleeve. Supreme Bing Yi, who had been gradually dying, was actually recovering at an extremely fast pace. Supreme Bing Yi first looked at Jian Wushuang with hatred and then looked at Great Void Divine Emperor with fear in his eyes. Lord Emperor. He was in a daze and was about to open his mouth to speak. The moment he said that, Great Void Divine Emperor glared at him coldly and chided. Don't you think that you've embarrassed yourself enough? Go back and follow me to off-world battlefield. When Supreme Bing Yi saw Great Void Divine Emperor, he was like a mouse that saw a cat. His body trembled when he heard what Jian Wushuang said, and he looked at Jian Wushuang with hatred. Then, he quickly took a step forward and turned into a flowing light that shot into the Great Void Temple. Jian Wushuang struggled to stand up in the starry sky. When he saw this scene, his face turned extremely ugly. It was not easy for him to finally gain an advantage over Supreme Bing Yi, but he did not expect Great Void Divine Emperor to appear and save Supreme Bing Yi. If he could not kill Bing Yi today, it would be extremely difficult to kill him in the future. Jian Wushuang took a deep breath and said, Lord Divine Emperor, Bing Yi has tried to kill me time and time again. He was the main force that had twice trampled on the Divine Life Palace in the past. Countless disciples of the Divine Life Palace have died at the hands of your Great Void Temple. Isn't it a little too easy for you to ask me to just let go of the past? Oh! Great Void Divine Emperor raised his eyebrows as if he was surprised that Jian Wushuang dared to disobey his orders. His voice turned cold and he replied, Jian Wushuang, do you think I'm discussing this with you? Bang! As he finished his sentence, an aura that was as vast as the mountains and seas exploded from Great Void Divine Emperor's body. In an instant, Jian Wushuang felt as if he had been hit by a giant hammer. He fell to the ground and his divine body almost shattered. The aura came and left quickly. In a breath's time, it was recalled by Great Void Divine Emperor. He looked at Jian Wushuang, who was lying on the ground with a pale face, and said coldly, Jian Wushuang, if it wasn't for the sake of Senior Gai Fu, I would have killed you. Jian Wushuang lay on his stomach in the void. Even though Great Void Divine Emperor had already retracted his aura, there was still an invisible mountain pressing down on his back, causing him to be unable to stand. Is this the power of an invincible supreme? Jian Wushuang clenched his fists tightly and his eyes were filled with endless humiliation. He had thought that after breaking through to the supreme realm, even if he could not run amok in the universe, he would at least have the power to protect himself. However, it was only at this moment, when he was truly facing an invincible supreme, that he realized how insignificant he was. In front of Great Void Divine Emperor, he was like Supreme Bing Yi in front of Overlord Patriarch. He had no power to resist at all. The gap between a half-invincible Supreme and an invincible Supreme was simply too great. Great Void Divine Emperor looked at Jian Wushuang, and the corners of his lips curled up into a cold smile. He said, "Jian Wushuang, from the way I look at you, you seem to be unconvinced?" Jian Wushuang did not reply. In the face of absolute power, all words were useless. Great Void Divine Emperor shook his head and said, "Jian Wushuang, if you are not convinced, you can come to off-world battlefield to find me after you recover. I will wait for you there." After he finished speaking, Great Void Divine Emperor wanted to leave. However, just as he turned around, he seemed to have thought of something. He stopped and said, "Jian Wushuang, for the sake of Supreme Master Gai Fu, I'll give you a kind reminder. You should keep a low profile. Your strength is not enough for you to act arrogantly in this universe. The universe is much more vast than you can imagine. You think that you have extraordinary talent and can fight at a higher level, which is enough for you to be proud and arrogant. However, your vision is too narrow and limited by your cultivation base, so you can only see this world. In this universe, you are nothing. Even I am just a drop in the ocean. You are not qualified to see the real experts and heaven's favorites." As Great Void Divine Emperor said this, he squinted his eyes and the corners of his mouth curved upwards. His expression was difficult to understand. He lowered his voice so that only the two could hear. He said slowly, "Jian Wushuang, how do you think Supreme Tarot died? That heaven's favorite who was invincible in the universe." Hearing this, Jian Wushuang's body trembled. Great Void Divine Emperor shook his head and said, "All right, Jian Wushuang, now that Supreme Master Gai Fu is asleep, there isn't anybody in the Divine Life Palace that can support you. Don't bring great trouble to the Divine Life Palace just because of your lowly life." After saying that, Great Void Divine Emperor looked at Jian Wushuang with disgust and playfulness. He did not say anything else and disappeared into the starry sky. With Great Void Divine Emperor's departure, this battle finally came to a close. We won. Lord Xue Jian has won. Supreme Bing Yi is no match for Jian Wushuang. Ruler Hao Jin and the others who were close to Jian Wushuang immediately cheered excitedly. The other powerhouses who came to watch the battle also had a look of awe. They all rushed forward and surrounded Jian Wushuang in the middle, flattering him. However, Jian Wushuang was not happy at all. Was this a victory? Jian Wushuang smiled bitterly in his heart. Great Void Divine Emperor's last words were like a heavy bomb that exploded in his mind. Was he really ignorant about the real universe? At this moment, the universe that he thought he had figured out suddenly became blurry, as if it was covered by a mysterious veil. And how did the powerful Supreme Tarot die? According to the remnant will of Supreme Tarot, it seemed to be related to a person named Devouring Emperor. Who was Devouring Emperor? Countless thoughts flooded Jian Wushuang's mind, but he could not figure it out. He could only shake his head and say, "Weak, weak, weak, weak." In the end, he was still too weak.